Urban exploration fail. The scare that made me end my hobby. Broke into an abandoned house in the village I grew up in England back when I was a teenager, maybe like 15 years ago now. I was with a couple of friends, but I broke off by myself and I ventured upstairs. When I turned at the top of the stairs, I saw a figure standing in the darkness just staring at me. I bolted out of the building as quickly as I could and my friends heard me and panicked, so they weren't far behind. I went back there a couple of weeks later with a bigger group to prove my story, and to my embarrassment, it was a tall mirror at the top of the stairs. The figure I saw was me. Yeah, not my proudest moment. Well, when I went, a homeless guy with a knife said I shouldn't be there, and I agreed. A group of us went into an old abandoned care home. We got in legally. It was pitch black, and I mean the kind of darkness where you can't see your hand in front of your face, even when you let your eyes adjust. Fortunately, we had a few light sources with us. After walking around and finding copious amounts of evidence that there were squatters staying there, not at the time of our arrival, thank God, we found ourselves standing in a room filled with graffiti, but not graffiti from a paint can. This was spelled in dried blood and excrement. The stench was horrendous. We got out of there so quickly, and we've never been back since. I used to walk around an abandoned building near a forest which was initially a child hospital in the 70s. It was a refugee housing in the 90s and a language school for Chinese students until 2007. Since then, it was abandoned. The students left quite suddenly, so I found diaries, certificates, and even food. It was interesting since the place wasn't vandalized at the time. Once I was inside the building again, I realized someone else was walking upstairs. I never left a place so fast. I jumped over the gate and headed to my car. When I reached there, a police car stopped in front of the building and the two officers jumped over the fence to enter it. No idea what was in there, but sometimes I wonder if I avoided more than just a report for trespassing. Danvers State Mental Hospital. Stumbling across an overgrown graveyard full of tiny little headstones with nothing but patient numbers. No names, no dates. The overwhelming inhumanity that all these nameless graves represented hit me all at once. I'm not easily frightened, and exploring an abandoned mental institution in the middle of the night had been an exciting adventure until that discovery. Even then, I wasn't afraid. Deeply saddened and nauseated, I lost my curiosity. I felt ashamed to be intruding on a space that had seen levels of human cruelty and suffering far beyond what I could ever imagine, so I left and I never went back. I have gathered that place has a bit of a special reputation for its overcrowding and the lack of humanity showed to its inhabitants. Honestly, sounds like an awful place. I used to work for a guy renovating houses. He'd buy these complete dumps for like $5,000 to $10,000 that had been abandoned for years. We'd fix them up and he'd rent the houses out. His daughter would go to houses to take pictures after he bought them, since he'd buy a lot of them sight unseen because they were so cheap. One house she went to take pictures at and she was kind of creeped out by the basement and didn't want to go in. She just opened the door, leaned in, reached her arm out and took a picture. When her dad reviewed the pictures, he saw a man standing in the basement about 5 feet from the camera, staring directly into it. Oh! Found a dead deer on top of an old grain mill. All of the stairs were removed so people couldn't climb them. Getting up there was hard enough without carrying a deer carcass on your shoulders. I think about that all the time.
Do you think it was a cougar?
No, I doubt most middle-aged women could get up there that easily. I found a bottle of some liquid in an abandoned drive-in theater building. I knocked it over, and the concrete started smoking, and we got nosebleeds instantly. Still no clue what it was, but we got the F out. Several years ago, a man was murdered in the city I was working in, and parts of his body were turning up at various locations. I think his hand and foot had been found, and a week had passed. I'm an architectural designer, and I was surveying an abandoned chapel that was slated to be renovated into condos. It was apparent that homeless people had been squatting in the chapel, but I wasn't sure how recently they'd been there. When I went into the basement, though, it was clear somebody was either there or had just left based on the smell. There were no lights due to the power being cut, and I didn't stick around long enough to see if anyone was currently occupying the same space as me. 2 days later, someone reported that they'd found the torso and head of the murdered man in a building attached to that chapel. I'd been too freaked out by the smell in the basement to continue on to the attached building, but I'm almost certain I would have been the one to find the body if I hadn't been. I found what looked like the remains of a pig, and it was wearing lingerie. Okay, but this is a crazy story and maybe it would explain what you found. In my undergrad, I took a forensic anthropology class, and our professor, later my graduate supervisor, told us a story of how they'd bury pigs dressed in women's clothing and underwear to study how the clothing broke down during decomposition. After one such study, they just left the pigs in place and I guess they forgot about them? I don't know. Anyway, the story goes that the location they used was just outside the city and was due to be developed into a shopping center. Needless to say, the developers found the pigs, said, "What the frick?" and called the police. Luckily, my professor is also the forensic anthropologist for the police and was able to explain things to them pretty quickly. Weird day for those contractors, I guess. As kids, we'd walk this quarter-mile railway tunnel near where I grew up. There were no tracks, but it was next to 2 live tunnels, so there was a slight element of danger. That and the fact that it was trespassing, I guess, and railway workmen or transport police could catch us at any moment. So, as you can imagine, it was dark. Real dark in the middle. But towards the end, there was enough light to barely see. One day, we took an old school pal down there, and after walking the length, almost at the end of the tunnel, just as it was beginning to get light, he stopped to look down at a large, uncovered, square 3-foot by 3-foot manhole. No, he luckily didn't fall in, but after a flash of brief confusion, he took in a deep breath and screamed and then immediately started sprinting for daylight. "Oh, crap! Frickin' run!" he screams. Naturally, without question, we ran, having a hard time catching him up. At the mouth of the tunnel, we stopped. All out of breath, we asked, "What the frick? What's wrong? What did you see?" His face was pure white and shaking, barely able to speak. He said, "There was someone down there, looking up at me." Now, this buddy was and still is a good friend of mine, but back then he wasn't known for being the sharpest tool in the drawer. Instantly we had an idea of what just happened, but slowly we returned to the open manhole. Then as the 4 of us stood around this hole looking down, sure enough, reflected in the still water about 5 feet down this frickin' hole was our 4 faces looking back up at us. Exploring an abandoned prison when part of the ceiling collapsed. It didn't hit me, but it was close enough to knock me over. I guess junkies used it as a place to shoot up because I fell on an old needle. I got tested to make sure I didn't get anything from it, but it scared me enough to stay away from abandoned buildings to this day. I got busted by a soldier who told me, rather calmly, that the spot was used for training with real bullets and that I'd better get out of there before he dragged my butt out to the cops. The guy was real nice, took the time to explain why it was dangerous and sent me on my way. I didn't insist otherwise. Weirdest part is we explored for 1 or 2 hours before getting busted and we met no one. We weren't hiding or anything. My friends and I went into the Gibraltar Mansion in Wilmington, Delaware. It was cool until we came across a room with an older man squatting in it. He was terrified of us and we felt pretty horrible, so we left after apologizing. There was a coffin, like a real coffin. We were in an abandoned factory that some rich family had owned, and there was this one room with a bunch of personal stuff, letters from the 50s, furniture, old photographs, clothes, and even booze, like someone's home had been put in there. In the middle of it all, a coffin. I swear to God, I'm not lying. The room was gloomy, it was a late summer afternoon, no power, and we didn't have flashlights. My friend was like, "Well, we've gotta open this coffin. We can't leave unless we do. We've gotta," and straight up lifted the lid. A sweet smell came from the darkness. When my grandmother died, I was the one to find her body, and I remember that particular sweet smell quite well. So my heart skipped a couple of beats. The coffin was full of candles. That's where the sweet smell was coming from this time. Exploring an old trailer that had been left abandoned for years, I found a little stone statue of Jesus at the base of a large dead tree. I squatted down and touched it, causing it to instantly crumble from the pressure. It felt like I'd activated some ancient curse. "Oh, I think you carry the Antichrist now," or some other ancient evil that statue was barely containing for decades before you finally provided the teeniest bit of stress needed to collapse after its long struggle. You might have doomed us all, only time will tell. Thanks, jerkwad. Exploring an abandoned manor with some friends. We'd been drinking and smoking and thought it would be cool. The ground floor entrances were covered with bricks, so we had to enter through the first floor, at 8 feet high, using an improvised ladder made of old trash and wood pieces. It was quite unstable and hard to climb, and we were 5 or 6 people. Being the only way out and knowing how slow it was, I was on the edge the whole time. We were exploring the floor. There was this cool glass ceiling, lots of debris, but suddenly we found a room filled with plastic containers with pink and brown liquids. Some friends decided to explore the ground floor, which was pitch black and involved going down a broken staircase that was missing several steps. They heard someone coughing in the dark and felt several people moving in the darkness as their eyes get used to it. At this point, I was hearing someone slowly walking in a room on the first floor, carefully stepping over the broken glass on the floor to not make too much noise, which was really creepy. We got the frick away, and on our way out we saw a roughed-up man with bloodshot eyes leaving the shack outside the house and staring at us. I still shiver when I remember his look. Probably just some junkies living there, but for an overly high 15-year-old, it was scary as frick. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Genius? Wow, I can't believe I finally have a place to tell this story. When I was in middle school, we went upstate in the summer. There was an abandoned house in the woods that we explored. Top floor was pretty pristine. The beds were made and the drawers and closets were shut with stuff neatly arranged inside. There were bats. The lower you went, the more disordered it got. The basement and garage were in complete disarray. Books and random crap were thrown all around. Beer cans and used Johnnies everywhere. We went to the far end of the house where the wall had partially collapsed, and that's when we saw the bear. Foolishly, we ran with all of our might. Thankfully, the house between us and the bear's lack of interest is why I'm typing this. Out of all the things in this story, you're lucky you didn't die from the bats. Bat feces are toxic to your lungs. You can get aggressive bacterial pneumonia from it, and it's airborne. You don't even have to touch it. My partner worked with a guy who died within a month from renovating an old barn without wearing a mask. He got sick from the bat feces in the rafters. If I go into a place and I see any bat scat, I'm out immediately. As 12-year-old kids, we were exploring the woods, as kids do. The forest eventually parted to an open field, and in the distance was an abandoned farm. Naturally, we crept inside, and in one of the horse stalls were all discarded hypodermic needles and old food. Our parents were quite mad when we told them what we found. There's a big abandoned factory near the center of our city that teens regularly visit. My friend was telling me a story about how she and a group of friends were walking around the ground floor, which was almost pitch black in places, when they saw a lone chair in the middle of the big room. They started joking about how it looked like the kind of place a kidnapper would tie a victim up, and then, in the distance, they heard a glass being smashed. They all took one look at each other, turned around, and got the heck out of Dodge. They were scared it was someone trying to escape. I used to break into this old abandoned children's hospital with some friends when we were teens. One time, I think perhaps the last time, there was a fresh, child-sized handprint in the dust on a wall, and what seemed like blood droplets and spray nearby. I really, really hope it was a raccoon print. Cane Hill Psychiatric Asylum in the UK, which could hold over 3,000 patients. Victorian era. The whole place was spooky as frick. A total labyrinth. Well, we found the morgue. 2 ceramic tables in the general shape of bodies. One was thick with dust, grime, and mold. The other was absolutely sparkling clean. Spotless. So the 3 of us left immediately. I'd crept into an abandoned house in Seattle in the 90s. The guy had recently died, but not before hoarding 3 stories worth of groceries, unopened QVC orders, and tons of ephemera. The power and water had been shut off, and he was going number 1 and 2 in buckets. I opened a couple of these, which would have been revolting on its own, but for some reason he was putting wigs and toupees in with the waste. There were stacks of wigs that had yet to be put in the buckets. I did get 3 bags of Liberty Dimes before I fled in disgust, though. My friends and I used to smoke Mary J at an abandoned school frequently. All of the doors and windows were boarded up except for the mail slots, and for some reason one of my friends decided to look inside. He exclaimed, "Holy crap!" So we all took turns looking in. Inside was a group of masked men. We weren't sure what they were up to, but we got out of there. I think they were looking for computers or anything they could steal, which is strange considering the school had been abandoned for at least the last 5 years. I walked into an old abandoned cabin in my neighborhood. I saw movement around me, and when I shone my flashlight to the walls, there were thousands of cockroaches and spiders there. I noped right out of there. I was exploring with my parents in an abandoned Soviet small city where the soldiers and their families had stayed. It was getting dark because of the coming storm. I found a basement and thought to just take a fast look into it. It was really dark, but I heard my mum saying on the other side of the basement corridor that she found something and I should see it. I just asked where she was, and then I heard my mum again from behind telling me to hurry up because the storm is coming and it started to rain. I was 20 years old at the time, but I turned around and got the F out of there with tears rolling down my cheeks and shaking like there was no tomorrow. I told my mum and she said it's another reason to just leave ASAP. My friends and I were exploring an abandoned military housing complex at night. It was in pretty bad shape, but there were lots of interesting things to see. We almost peed ourselves a couple of times because of mannequins behind doors and stuff. There was also a neat art installation with records hanging from the ceiling. Anyway, we climbed up some stairs to the tallest part of the building, and we saw some faint light coming from under a door. Somehow, the door had been booby-trapped, and as soon as my friend opened it, there was a crash and a cinder block on a rope that came swinging out the open door and just barely missed him. I got a split-second look inside where I saw a small fire, a mattress on the ground, and then a man moving quickly towards us. He was silhouetted by the light, so I couldn't make out what he looked like or what exactly he was holding, but I wasn't about to stick around and find out. I yelled, "Run!" and we bolted out of there as fast as our legs could carry us. About the mannequins in the first part, I never really understood why people in horror movies freaked out about mannequins. That is, until I played Resident Evil Biohazard, scared as heck, and repeatedly wasted my ammo every time one of those things made me panic and unload a full clip of ammo on it. So, no judgment. I do urban exploring quite frequently, and nothing ever makes us leave instantly apart from dodgy floors or squatters. However, 5 years ago, me and a few friends explored a derelict farmhouse with outbuildings which had evidently been left for decades with the state it was in. After having a look around the place and finding nothing but empty buildings, we had a look inside what appeared to be an old stable. Inside were literally hundreds of empty tins of cat food, some nooses tied to a beam, and a fairly new pair of scissors with a brownish crust covering the blades. The smell was putrid. We ventured further into the building and noticed on the floor was a cat's tail and a few cat's paws which had been dismembered and left there. We swiftly exited, and on our way out, a pickup pulled up onto the side of the farm. Bearing in mind this was surrounded by woods and fields with no track leading to it, and there were 3 men standing on the bed of said truck. Needless to say, we got out of there as quickly as we could and haven't seen or heard anything about it since. The farm went on the market and sold earlier this year, so it would be interesting to see who previously owned it. I've been many places in the tri-state area, and I've experienced floors that are decaying. Once I almost fell, and thankfully it was a very small drop. I've seen needles, animal corpses, you name it. One time at a prison in New Jersey, I saw a cell that was decked out with a decorated dollhouse, and you could tell someone was staying there. But the creepiest experience I've ever had was about 6 years ago. I was in an abandoned hospital in a residential part of New York City, which had been abandoned less than a decade prior to our visit. Despite this, it was not a well-known location. We went at night and were exploring the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors, all without issue and in total silence. There was little to no graffiti, and everything was left. Patient records and tissue samples, medicines, and medical equipment. As we reached the 4th floor, we passed a random room that said, "No explosive gases can be used in this room." I read that sign aloud, and we immediately heard a huge thud coming from inside that exact room. My blood ran cold, and I literally froze because I felt that someone in that room was making themselves known. We ran out of there and heard slamming doors as we went down all the stairs. I've not been back there since, and it's now been sold and is being renovated into a housing complex. I still wonder what would have happened if we went into that room. This isn't scary, but it is an interesting story. My friend was walking in the forest and found an old house. When he moved some stuff, the ceiling broke and an old German light machine gun fell down. Dead crows and satanic symbols on the walls in an abandoned building on an island. I used to mess around this massive property that consisted of 3 gigantic factory buildings right next to a big strip mall plaza. It was pretty popular because the cops never cared enough to patrol, so the whole place was completely covered in really amazing graffiti. Once, our group of 9 visited just after a tropical storm that knocked out power in most of the state. We thought it would be sick to go stargaze up on the roof. To get up, you had to crawl through this partially collapsed passageway and then climb 3 stories up an old ladder. A few minutes after we all got up, a waterlogged section of roof started collapsing, and we all had to scramble on top of each other to get down the ladder, with a few people basically falling partway down. We managed to crawl out of the passageway part just as some metal parts of the roof started crashing down. Decided we probably shouldn't stick around and find out how much more water damage the storm had done. Still continued to visit for several years until the property changed hands and a security guard was hired to watch it, but never dared go on the roof again and definitely never went after rainstorms. There's this abandoned old cabin in the middle of the woods that's near my house. I believe it's from the early 1900s, and it's falling apart and blocked off by the rangers, but they don't really patrol this forest, so it's easy to jump the gate and hike it up to the cabin. I decided to explore one day and climbed up the rotting deck to the main building. It was so dark and musty with broken glass and acorns everywhere. I went deeper into the cabin to explore the different rooms. As I was walking around, I started to hear a rustling noise. Me being an idiot, I started to walk closer to the sound. I moved a rotting board over to the side and a frickin' squirrel leapt out and attached itself to my sweater. I started screaming, grabbed the squirrel with my hands and threw it off me. I ran out of the cabin and never looked back. I still pass the cabin when I hike with my dog, but I've learned my lesson. It belongs to the forest now. What celebrity behaved like a complete jerk to you in public? Wayne Brady screamed at my sister for taking his picture in Vegas. She wasn't taking his picture, he just walked into the shot. He freaked out, screaming that he wanted her to show him that she was deleting it. She was trying to explain that she didn't even know he was there, and showed him the picture that only had a sliver of him in it when she looked through the shots. He continued to berate her about not respecting his privacy in the middle of the Vegas Strip. She was in tears, apologizing for doing nothing wrong, and he never acknowledged he was in the wrong and continued to badmouth her as he stormed away. Can't watch him anymore. Mark Wahlberg did an appearance at his brother's restaurant. He refused to take pictures with anyone taller than him. Now, this I can believe. Met Tiger Woods when I was 15. He slapped my hat out of my hand. A different golfer whom I didn't know ran up, picked up my hat, and asked if his signature would be okay. I agreed, but I don't know who he was or what his name was, but my grandpa was pleased upon seeing it. Pauly Shore. It was mid-90s in New York City, and my wife and I were at a very popular Asian restaurant with a huge wait time. He walks in with an entourage and tries to worm his way ahead of everyone else. He tried to play the "don't you know who I am" card. Hostess was having none of it, said, "Don't know, don't care, you'll wait." They left in a huff. I know this won't come as a surprise, but Steven Seagal used to frequent a restaurant I worked at. Guy was a colossal piece of crap. He treated his wonderful family like crap, and it was obvious he was cheating on his wonderful wife with the Asian nanny. This fricking moron would come into a 10-table restaurant, all 6'5" and 300 pounds of him, wearing a golden kimono in the South, and would wonder why people were looking at him. So he made us take the entry partition down and put it around his table. He was an absolute trash human being. Also met Peyton Manning one night after the Super Bowl he lost to the Saints. This was at an ultra-high-end golf course, and we were not allowed to act like we recognized celebrities, which was more awkward than anything. Anyway, he walked up and ordered a beer and introduced himself, but I was already turning to get the beer as he stuck out his hand to shake my hand and tell me who he was. As if I didn't know who Peyton Manning was in the grounds when I saw his forehead pull into the parking lot. So I blew off Peyton Manning for a handshake. How many of you losers can say that? Great freaking guy, though. Well, the narrator thought that maybe the author was drawing too many conclusions about Steven Seagal, but after a quick Google I can see that he is, if anything, painting him as less of a D-bag than the man himself often behaved as in public. Didn't happen to me, but I had a physics teacher in high school who sat next to Bill Nye on a plane once. Apparently, he was super unpleasant to be around. Every time this thread comes up, James Corden ends up taking it over. "Hey James, you won't remember me, but me and my friends sat at a table next to you and Harry Styles and some others in Manchurian Legends in London's Chinatown about 6 years ago. We didn't bother you, but you were a massively entitled C-word who yelled and treated the waitstaff like crap. And when one of my party politely suggested you calm down, you got really aggressive and threatening, in a chubby way like a boozy panda. So my question is this: why did Harry seem so cool while you were such a massive, throbbing eggplant?" This is from his AMA thread, by the way, literally hundreds of posts like this from ex-fans, staff, and other actors. I haven't met a rude celebrity yet, but Stanley's security at Calgary Comic-Con a few years back was fricking brutal. The guy acted like he was a fricking mercenary. Stan Lee would sit in a chair and you'd come close to him to get your photo op, and Stan let me be pretty well arm-to-arm close, and his security guard yelled at me and asked Stan if he authorized me to be that close. Even the photographer looked at the security guy like he was crazy. But at the same Comic-Con, meeting Norman Reedus, Stephen Yeun, and Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, was amazing. They're all super awesome and tried to have a legitimate conversation with you. Steve Yeun even complimented my glasses. 10 out of 10, best con for me. I was the butthole in my store. I saw Don Cheadle at an airport and was thinking about Ocean's 11 and said to my friend, "Dude, it's Bernie Mac." And he looked back and said, "Nah, I'm the other black guy from Ocean's 11, but at least you liked the movie." Jared Leto hit on my girlfriend at the time and called me fat. His brother Shannon was super nice though. At least he didn't tattoo fat on your forehead. He was a total rude, aloof jerk, and his brother was super lovely, warm, and sweet. Jimmy Fallon. I liked his show, and one day while I was getting a tour at NBC Studios, he bumped into me and turned around and said sorry and then flipped me off, and it's not like I got in his way. He walked into me from behind. David Cross is pretty miserable. He's from Atlanta and his sister runs a food truck in town. Her recipes were all named after David Cross or Arrested Development type stuff, so my wife and I, being fans of David, asked about it and she told us she was his sister. So for months we'd chat her up anytime we ordered food from her truck, and eventually David was in town. She invites us to come to the food truck to meet him, so we bring a poster from the early 2000s and are super pumped to meet him. We get there and she's very anxious and hesitant to introduce us. Weird, but okay. No, it's okay, I'll introduce you. She does, and he was incredibly dismissive and unpleasant. Never heard of anyone having a good interaction with him. Our best interaction was with Conan O'Brien. He was a total class act. Chatted him up in a bathroom line of all places and said my wife and I were huge fans. He said we should come on by the table to chat. I told him we didn't want to interrupt his dinner, but he insisted, then asked if he wanted pictures, and was super cool. I'll say on behalf of Cross that I listened to him on Andy Richter's 3 Questions, and he says he feels bad about being a jerk to his fans when he was younger. He admits actively being a jerk, but he also said he didn't really know how to talk to people at all. He said he'd get weird when people complimented him or said they liked something. I thought it was kind of good of him to admit he'd been a jerk in the past, instead of continuing to be a jerk and just thinking his fans are buttholes. Kurt Vonnegut. I had to get in touch with him frequently for work at a non-profit for several years. He was never once even vaguely polite. I tried to bum a cigarette off Kurt Vonnegut once, when he was guest professor at my old college. Before I could even say a word, he looked up and fricking growled at me. So naturally, I panicked and fled. At the end of the year, the school paper did an interview with him and he was like, for some reason, hardly anyone came to my office hours. Yeah, Kurt, it's because you growl at people. Bobby Flay. We paid hundreds of dollars to go to a fancy event he was participating in. Waited for a long time just to meet him and say hi, and he looked at us and walked away. He was a real jerk about it too. Bill Nye the Science Guy. I was on a field trip in middle school and our teacher saw him. She politely asked if he could say something to us or just say hi. We always watched him in science class. He told her to F off and basically berated her for bothering him and asking him to speak to a bunch of kids. I'm not sure if he was just having a bad day, but it was not the best experience as a child. Some narrator's insights halfway through the script. Bill Nye's name came up a lot in this story grouping, which may be upsetting to some people, but there it is. Apparently, just don't talk to him if you see him in public. I won't do any more of his stories unless they're particularly juicy. Me and my sister saw Alec Baldwin, Tina Fey, and Salma Hayek on the street when we were eating lunch. They were just coming out of a car, about to go into some building next to us. We had no idea why they were together, but in retrospect, it was definitely because they were filming 30 Rock together. My sister said, "Oh my god, is that Tina Fey?" And Alec Baldwin turned around and went right in her face and said, "Don't freaking say that. Don't speak to us. Why would you say something like that? You can't speak to us, not now." But it didn't really end there. He yelled again at us outside the building, saying, "Don't look over here. Turn around and eat your food. F off." He sounded genuinely furious at us, almost like he wanted us to yell back and start something with him. Honestly, my sister was on the verge of tears. It was horribly embarrassing. Everyone knows now that Alec Baldwin has a history of screaming at people, but at the time we had no idea. Don't get me wrong, my sister shouldn't have yelled at Tina Fey like that, but the way Alec snapped was straight up scary, like he was about to physically attack her. Salma Hayek and some other lady who I didn't recognize came over and apologized to us. She asked if we wanted her to go and get Tina and get her autograph because apparently Tina felt bad, but we said no. She then talked to us about the food we were eating, which was Mexican food, and we ended up having a brief conversation about New York's lack of quality Mexican food. She was incredibly charismatic and sweet. My dad has been a radio personality for over 30 years and worked in country music for over half of that time. He gets to meet celebrities semi-regularly. Apparently Keith Urban was really nice, Carrie Underwood was kind of mediocre because he caught her right after her performance and she was tired, but Kenny Chesney puts the D in D-bag. Direct quote from my dad. Kenny promised to sign some pictures, t-shirts, etc. for a couple of kids who won a game through the radio. Kenny instead took a bunch of groupies into one of the back rooms of the studio with a bottle of whiskey and locked the door. When my dad tried to get him to open the door and fulfill his end of the deal, he called the cops on my dad and he was lucky enough to get a cop who was a good acquaintance. Cops said there wasn't much he could do other than make Kenny leave. So that's what he did. Kids never got their stuff signed, so my dad gave them some coupons for free pizza. He said that after a few years, other radio hosts told him they had similar encounters with Kenny. I've had the perfect combination of bad star, good star. It was at Dragon Con, maybe 2005. I'm going through the big autograph room waiting to get David Carradine's autograph. He looked so mad. He didn't say a word as I told him how much I enjoyed his work. Okay, I get it. Maybe he was having a bad day. Next to Mr. Carradine was Mark Singer, star of Beastmaster, V, among other things. Mr. Singer is smiling, talking to people as they go by. He looks genuinely happy to be there. Suddenly, a woman behind me stumbled and dropped a huge stack of materials she wanted autographed. Mr. Carradine looked down on her like she was a bug. Mark Singer jumped over his table and started helping the woman pick up her things. Didn't hesitate one moment, just started helping. That's when I decided if I ever became famous, I was going to try and be like Mark Singer, not David Carradine. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I sat next to Rosario Dawson on a flight from LA to Austin while she was shooting Death Proof. I didn't recognize her, and she kept trying to strike up conversations while I was studying for a Cal 2 final. I was a butthole to her until it came out that she was Rosario Dawson. Then we had a very pleasant conversation. I regret meeting her because I am the jerk. Prince Andrew spent a lot of time around him 10 years ago, working at private school events he attended. The guy was a total prick. Maybe he would have been nicer to you if you were younger. I met Shane Dawson at a restaurant I used to work at. He used to come in a few times a year with his fiancée and in-laws. He's a prick. None of my servers liked him or wanted to serve his family, and I damn near had to fight some little girls off the property because they wouldn't leave without seeing him. I sat near him at Denny's in Santa Monica around midnight once. Must have been back when he had longer hair, and I don't think he was dating Ryland yet, but I'd already stopped watching years prior. He was alone with his laptop, didn't even realize until my boyfriend pointed him out. So I looked behind and indeed it was Shanae. Can't remember a single time he thanked our server, although while we were there she was just refilling his coffee. Apparently some people don't feel the need to thank their servers every single time they visit their table. Afterwards I realized he'd been live tweeting about the other couple a few booths down from us who were seated closer to him. We narrowly avoided him talking crap about us to thousands of people. My gosh. Met Dennis Leary. Butthole. Figures. Mike Rowe was super cool though. Reggie Jackson. He was a childhood idol of mine. I got the opportunity to get a photo with him at some booth at a trade show called Internet World. Years ago during the .com boom. No one was in line to get pictures with him, so I walked up to get a photo while he was apparently trying to get the girls in the next booth over to sleep with him. He acted all bugged that I asked for a photo, even though that's what he was hired for, and rolled his eyes. I guess he thought I was crimping his style just by showing up in line to get a picture. I tossed the picture in the trash once I got it. Later that day, I got a ball signed by Steve Garvey, who was super nice. He replaced Reggie Jackson as my hero that night. Ace Frehley of Kiss. It was at a rock and roll, TV, movie memorabilia convention in the mid-90s, shortly before the Kiss reunion, and he clearly didn't want to be there. He didn't talk to fans, didn't say hi, heck, he didn't even look at you when you came to his table. He just signed whatever you placed in front of him, and you were hustled away afterwards. On the other hand, Adam Batman West was at the next signing table and he was totally cool guy. Shook hands, chatted with everyone, signed whatever we wanted, posed for pictures, etc. Meeting him more than made up for Ace's surly, hungover D-bag act. A famous soap opera star in my country, he came into the Dairy Queen I was working at. I didn't know who he was and my co-worker started hyperventilating and went into the back. The guy was rude and when I handed him his cone he said, "Is that all?" Like he expected extra because he was famous. Yeah dude, if you order one scoop, you get one scoop. Didn't find out he was famous until he left and my co-worker came back to the front. "Sir, this is a Dairy Queen, not a drama queen." I've forgiven this particular author for not giving us a name purely on the basis of that clapback added by the subsequent comment. Thank you, oh sassy one. Diana Ross. I worked in a health club in a hotel across the street from a stadium when I was young. She came in, looked at the pool, which was a really decent lap pool, and said, "My bathtub is bigger than this." I replied, "Go back to your bathtub then." She wanted me fired instantly. HR told me to go home for 2 days because if they fired everyone she wanted fired, the hotel wouldn't have any staff. I met James Brown back in the 80s when I lived in Vale. The man was dissatisfied with everything and generally drunk. Absolute flip side was meeting Mr. Rogers when I was at Pitt. That man was the real deal. I wouldn't say disappointing, as I was never eager to meet him, but Drake. Drake was just unprofessional and egotistical when I worked with him both times. This was before he got big, first award show type level. He's told me to F off directly, and I watched his mum calm him down from a tantrum. My fiancé is a chef at a pretty prominent boutique hotel restaurant in Philly. He says the two worst guests were Ariana Grande, made not one but two servers cry, and the Rolling Stones. The best guests were Sylvester Stallone, Pink, Lady Gaga, and Guy Fieri. Anyone from Pittsburgh can tell you that Ben Roethlisberger is a horrible person. I have a friend who owns a bar on the south side, and he has, on multiple occasions, just walked into the bar and said, "My friends and I are drinking for free tonight." He also told Arnold Palmer's grandson that he doesn't sign autographs if he's not getting paid to do so. Legend has it that he earned a pretty nasty verbal beatdown from Palmer, and apparently he's banned from his golf course. Arnold Palmer, on the other hand, was an incredibly nice guy. Bill Cosby, even before all his real horrible stuff got publicly known, he came to a restaurant in DC where I was a hostess. I came to get him for his table and he said, "Do you not need a college degree for this job?" No, man, have you never met a server before? I was sitting, undressed, in a Korean day spa steam room when a guy who looked just like Lawrence Fishburne walked in and sat down across from me. I was there with two friends and we were talking, and you could tell we were all like, could that really be Morpheus? We just kept talking and he was listening to whatever story we were reminiscing about, and then he smiled at something we said and we saw the tooth gap. We all played it cool though and didn't say anything until after he left. 10 out of 10, a nice guy to hang out undressed with. The lead singer of Smash Mouth showed me a picture of him sticking a beer bottle into a Brazilian woman. Ruined Astro Lounge for me. I met Wayne Gretzky once. Guy's a bit of a chode, to be honest. I caught him on a bad day. We all get like that. His father, rest in peace, was so much cooler than he was. On the flip side, my brother met Gord Downey, also rest in peace, at a get-together. He was with his girlfriend and her family at one of her parents' friends' place. They were all sitting, chatting, having a good time. Out of nowhere, Gord walks in like it's nothing. Apparently the owners of the house were friends with Gord. My brother, being a huge Tragically Hip fan, was internally freaking out, but he kept cool on the outside so as to not bother this guy. He talked with him for a while about sports and things like that. Towards the end of the night when my brother was getting ready to leave, Gord stopped him and shook his hand while saying, "Thank you for pretending not to know who I am." Deion Sanders. I interviewed him at an NFL military event like 8 or 9 years ago, and he was a prick the whole time. He threw my lav mic on the ground when he was done instead of placing it in my outstretched hand. I was also active duty military at the time, and the event was on a ship. Hey Sanders, if you hear this, F you, dude. F you. Yeah, but he was also capable of being a jerk and throwing mics to the ground at MLB events. You gotta respect that kind of versatility. This guy expected my seat on a plane. He was our local news anchor. Actually said, "I may look familiar." I said, "You're a merchant banker?" Justin Timberlake. This was when I was working a drive-thru at Burger King around 2002 to 2003 or so. He came up at the drive-thru with someone else driving, but he was sticking his head out like, "Hey, hey, hey!" at us. I didn't really recognize him, but he asked if we knew who he was. I said no, but my coworker said yes. Then he looked at me like, "You don't know?" and was just really confused. My coworker said it was Justin Timberlake and he said, "Yeah, hello, come on man." Then he just sort of had small talk. He asked us how work was, how our day was. But here's the thing. The entire time he's leaning all the way over the driver, who was clearly horribly uncomfortable and a bit crushed by him leaning over on him. He asked if I was from the Middle East and I said no. He clearly didn't listen and said, "Yeah, that sucks. Sorry about the whole Afghanistan thing." He asked if we wanted his autograph. We said sure. He wrote it down and gave it to us. He then said bye and left. It was all in all a really funny experience, and I try not to let it influence my view of him because he was clearly on something, but he just came off like a big goofy attention-loving silly Billy the entire time. Met Morgan Freeman at a Bed Bath & Beyond. He was shopping for a teapot on a lower shelf and stood up right when I almost walked into him, and I was like, "Wow, you look just like Morgan Freeman." And he said without skipping a beat, "If I was Morgan Freeman, wouldn't I be in Hollywood or something?" And the voice made me now like 99.9% certain it was him. And I was like, "I guess you would. Enjoy your time here." I don't regret meeting him, and I don't think he was being a jerk. I just thought it was so Morgan Freeman of him to have a line like that to make you wonder if you met Morgan Freeman, or just a guy that likes to act like a character in a bunch of his movies. What's the dumbest thing a criminal has done or said to a cop? I read a theft suspect her Miranda rights, to which she stated in a recorded interview, "I'm invoking my right to silence and a lawyer because I stole a lot of crap and I don't want to incriminate myself." I stopped someone who was in the area of a load of theft from motor vehicles. After a bit of questioning, I carried out a search and found numerous wallets, phones, and other things. He claimed that all of the cards were his, all 13 different identities. To be fair, he stuck to his story. He carried it all the way to court, going not guilty. "Okay then, Mr. Jones, you're under arrest for 12 counts of theft. Mr. Fletcher, you're also under arrest for 12 counts of theft. Mrs. Rodriguez, you are under arrest for 12 counts of theft." Stopped a lady for speeding 15 miles per hour over the speed limit. I asked what her reason could be for going so fast. She said, "I live here. You can't give me a speeding ticket. I live just down the street. I live here. This is unbelievable. I live here." So my personal favorite was when a bloke on a motorbike swerved in front of our squad car and crashed. We hopped out, picked the bike up off him, it was pinning his leg, and asked, "You alright, mate?" To which he replied, "Of course I'm alright. What do you mean?" "Well, you just fell off your bike, mate." "No, I didn't." He just kept insisting that there was no way he could have crashed, and it must have been someone else. I called the cops on my roommate in college because she tried to attack me and she wouldn't cooperate with the cops, so she got cuffed and was screaming about how she was going to beat me good. They were like, "Yeah? You're going to beat her good?" And she was agreeing. In court later, the judge asked her, "So you think it's okay to beat someone good if they turn your TV off when you're not there?" And she nodded and said, "Yes, I do." And the judge just deep sighed. She got a big fat fine because they couldn't prove assault. She got charged with something lesser that had a max fine of about $1,500. Funny thing was, she had a pay or appear date for like 3 days before the one she was assigned at our trial, so they agreed to just merge the 2 dates so she wouldn't have to appear twice. So that means she already went to court for something else and got fined for something else too. Folks, in case you were wondering, if you blurt something like this out by accident one time, it might be in your best interest to revise your statement further down the line. People say honesty is the best policy. You can always be honest about seeing a better way forward. Friend who is an officer told me this one a little while ago. He was driving near where a known car thief lived, so he stops by. SUV in the driveway with no tags. My friend walks up, runs the VIN, stolen. Now the property had a house on it, and then out back a small mother-in-law suite where said thief lived. Officer walks out back, knocks, and then hears a car door. Officer starts running, engine starts, and yeah, the thief is driving away in the stolen SUV. Officer knows where he ditches stolen cars at, so has an officer stake out that area. Sure enough, 2 hours later, the SUV rolls up with a Jeep following it. SUV driver wipes down the dash, wipes down the outside door handle, and gets in the Jeep. Officer pulls them over and arrests them both. Why both? The Jeep is stolen too. Officer runs her license, sends another officer to her address, and guess what? She had a stolen car at her place too. 3 stolen cars recovered, 2 people in jail, all because one officer decided to stop by a thief's last address. Not my story, but my police officer friend's. He had gone in to arrest someone for dealing substances. He was in full uniform while someone else had already been there undercover. The substance dealer looks at the undercover cop and says, "You're undercover." "Yes, well done." He looks at my uniformed friend and says, "You're undercover too." He was not. Then he looks at someone else, not a police officer at all, and says, "And you." The guy responds with, "How am I an undercover police officer? I just bought substances off of you." And that's how they made an unexpected arrest at that raid. Not a police officer, but my father was a 911 dispatch operator. My father was working one night and he gets a call from a man who was obviously drunk. 911, what's your emergency? Yeah, I think I just heard a red car crash." You heard a red car crash?" "Yeah." "Okay, police are on their way." Click. My dad finds out later that this guy was driving drunk and crashed his car not far from his house. The guy decides to get out of his car, stumble home, and dial 911 to report the fact that he'd had a car crash. In his drunken mind, he figured he'd report the crash as someone who heard it and he'd get off somehow. but he had to specify the color because apparently a red car crashing sounds different than a blue car crashing. Student paramedic here once went to a family with a 2-year-old with difficulty breathing. Walked into the house to find 4 people and the parents smoking green herb with the baby in the room. The baby was crying, coughing and spluttering. Couldn't believe my eyes. My mentor swiftly rang for police backup and we filled out some safeguarding paperwork concerns. Pretty sure they arrested them on scene for neglect. Dad's a detective. Had a murder case where a dog walker found a severed head in a park. Over the rest of the morning, they found a full set of chopped up body parts around that park. A trail of blood led from each part and they followed them all the way back to a nearby house. In through the door and up the stairs to a room covered in blood with a guy asleep in a bed. Turns out this guy had got drunk with a friend, had an argument, killed him, chopped him up and hid his body parts in the park before passing out back at the house. Police caught him literally red-handed. Apparently he was really confused how they got him so quickly. I was police at the time. In the middle of the night, my partner and I found a car in a cemetery. Stolen cars were dumped there regularly. The car had its windows down and it had only recently been left there. It was still warm to touch. It didn't flag up as stolen, and through the window I could see a crystal pipe in plain view. That gives us the ability to search the car. Inside we find a bunch of crystal pipes, 3.5 grams of crystal, a small amount of green herb, and a gat. There was also a tablet phone that was unlocked, and while we were searching the car, the tablet kept on receiving messages from people trying to score crystal. I had a quick look through the phone and was able to figure out that the owner of the car had come out from the city. I worked rurally at the time. They'd come out to make a score from one of the local gangs. But the gang didn't want her turning up, so arranged to meet her at the cemetery and conduct business somewhere else. I leave a business card under the wipers, not my card but the station's, and on the back I wrote that she, the owner of the car, should come down to the station if she wants to get her stuff back. And sure enough she did, at 9 in the morning, high as all heck, looking for her crystal and gat. All the people from To Catch a Predator. NBC has online transcripts and they still come up with the stupidest excuses. The narrator can't really repeat any of those transcripts here, but I encourage you to read them if you want a rather morbid laugh about how people who have explicitly tried to proposition minors try to pass it off as something else. If they were telling the truth, it would be an almost Tobias Funke level of unfortunate phrasing. Suspect was caught for substance possession on the streets, and we were talking to the prosecutor to get a warrant for his house. Somehow he managed to call his wife without our notice, and as we realized what had happened, we heard him saying, "Honey, go take the fish out of the fridge." After we got the warrant and searched his house, there was his fridge full of speed and the plate with fish which his wife had prepared for his return thrown in the trash. Retired cop here. Boy, do I have stories. One idiot move a guy made was to steal some poor girl's car. It was her first car, she worked full-time, was a sweet little thing and we felt so bad, she was crushed. Also in the car for some reason was her cell phone. So a colleague who has the gift of talking crap really well calls the number. A guy answers. It goes a little something like this. "Motherfricker, you stole my girlfriend's car." The answer went, "Which I will frick you up and then frick your girlfriend." "Bring it, motherfricker. No cops, no friends. Me and you. I'm at the Chevron on Main Street and 5th. I'm calling your witch butt out." "Which, I'm on my way." The phone clicks. Me? "No fricking way, he's coming." The guy rounded the corner and pulls into the gas station. We hid our cars behind it and then, when he parked, we boxed him in. He had a Glock too. Fricking idiot. He was on probation and had a loaded piece. Yes, he showed up in the stolen car with a fricking shaved key in the ignition he used to steal it. Because people liked it so much, I talked to the original cop who has the gift of talking crap. He said a few months later at court, the guy claimed the gat was not his. As we found it under the driver's seat, he said it must be hers. So messed up. But the jury didn't buy it. We saw him shoving something from his waist under the seat when he saw us. Also, yeah, the look on his face was classic. It went from, "I'm gonna kill this dude," to the look a prey animal gets when it knows it's done. He was killed a few years later in a chase in another stolen car. He was ejected from that one. Motor vehicle stop. "License and registration, please." Proceeds to lean over the passenger seat, scoops up a handful of lo mein and tries to put it in the officer's hand. He was locked up for DUI, 4th offense. To this day, I still wonder if he thought he was passing his correct paperwork or if the Chinese food was some sort of peace offering. was witness to a crime and had to give evidence in court. Basically witnessed a girl crashing her car and barrel rolling it into a tree. She was clearly drunk. The firemen arrived after 10 minutes, her car had leaked petrol everywhere, and then her husband shows up on foot and tries to calm her down, followed by her mother in a car and the police. She tried to claim that she wasn't the one driving, even though no one else had been in the car. In court a year later, she said her mother had been driving, the one who showed up in her own car 10 minutes after the crash. She also punched an officer in the face and was pepper sprayed, but that's a whole other story. Needless to say, she was found guilty. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Dispatcher. Had a guy call in and tell us that he's currently violating the protective order by being with his ex who is pregnant by him. Wants us to call the judge and get it dismissed so they can go inside the restaurant and eat. Officer is standing next to my partner who answers the call and asks the guy where he is so he can send the judge to him. The guy hangs up. Responded to an apartment complex for a kid eating a corn dog and was stuck on the roof. The FD arrives and gets the kid off the roof. Asked the kid why he was eating a corn dog on the roof. His answer was, "Because I threw it up there." His look of duh left me speechless. DUI trial. Defendant chooses to represent herself. She tries to introduce evidence during the trial, but is quickly blocked by the prosecution. The judge, maybe taking pity on the flaming train wreck that was this woman's defense, asks to see the evidence. It was a receipt from the bar she left before I stopped her that showed she purchased 2 large margaritas. Her whole defense was, "I couldn't have been drunk after only 2 margaritas." She was found guilty. My initial reason for stopping her was that she drove down an embankment on the side of the road to get to a McDonald's drive-thru. My friend is sober driving and there's not enough seats, so 2 people offer to go in the boot. On the way, she gets pulled over and the officer comes up to the window and asks if she knows why he pulled her over. She says, "Because of the 2 people in my boot?" The cop says, "No, because you failed to indicate at the last intersection, but tell me more about the people in your boot." "These are my pants, but those are not my pockets. Can't make this crap up." I maintain that there's a small chance that there was a tiny portal in front of each pocket redirecting to a less innocent man's accoutrements, but nobody listens to me. One of my favorite Cops episodes was a guy they stopped, pulled some substances out of his pants, and his response was, "Those aren't my pants." The cop then said, "Oh, and whose pants are they and why are you wearing them then?" The guy said, "I don't know." My ex said to the cop who pulled him and his friends over, "I'm so frickin' high right now." I had a friend back in the day that earned the name DUI Don because he was driving a girl home after partying one night. She was off her rocker and he was only high. Got pulled over, could easily say that he's sober, was happy to blow into the tube and get out of it. The first thing he says to the cop is, "I'm gonna level with you, I'm really high." He spent that night in jail. And the cherry on this, and the reason I know the full details of it all, is because the girl with him was 17 and bonus, homeless. When she didn't have anywhere else to go, she gave them my address, an 18-year-old living alone, and I got to become her temporary legal guardian. Awesome night. Thanks, DUI Don. "Sir, can I see your driver's license?" "I don't have one." "Then why were you driving?" "I wasn't. I was traveling." I was the victim of burglary, but heard this from the police officer. I saw the guy breaking into my place on security camera and called them. They managed to arrest the guy while he was still inside packing up my stuff. He was pretty cocky to the police, as he thought that as he hadn't actually left with his bag of swag, that he hadn't committed a crime yet. All he did was break a window. My grandpa was a cop. He told me a story about how when he was still in uniform filling up his squad car, someone tried to rob him with a knife. Needless to say, that didn't work out for him. Apparently it went something like this. "Give me your wallet." "What?" "Give me your wallet." "Are you sure you want to do that?" "Yeah, now hand it over." Grandpa pulls out gun. "Okay, you're under arrest." The robber displayed a shocked Pikachu face. My brother is a Detroit cop. Told me this one. They got a call from someone reporting their car was stolen. They show up and it turns out someone had already stolen the tires off the car and then a different group stole the actual car. They pushed it 2 blocks without tires and left perfect grooves in the street all the way to their garage. Their defense was, "But we didn't steal the tires." Detroit. When we rob you, we really rob you. I'm a corrections officer. 2 inmates got into a fight in a hallway. I was the closest to them and only saw the start of the fight out of the corner of my eye. In my report, I wrote that I saw the 2 inmates fall to the ground with one on top of the other. Later, the hearing sergeant was reading the report to one of the inmates so they could dispute any facts in the report they felt were untrue or biased. He asked the inmate if they wanted to dispute any facts in my report. The inmate said, "Yeah, we didn't fall to the ground. I grabbed the other inmate and slammed his butt on the floor." What would have been a simple fighting charge turned into an assault charge. Woman is waiting for her DUI trial in the courtroom. The lawyers and judge are milling around and getting their paperwork in order. The trial starts in 10 to 15 minutes. The prosecuting attorney asks her if she wants to take the plea deal one last time. She refuses and goes on about how this is unconstitutional and the police and courts are corrupt and how she's going to take her kid to school, blah blah blah. She's starting to cause a bit of a scene, yelling, acting like a child, just being generally annoying. Someone in the room gets a whiff of alcohol. She's out on bond, so she can basically be given a PBT at any time for any reason. The judge orders one on her. She registers a .226 in court. This woman who is on trial for DUI had the audacity to drive to court drunk and then moan and groan about how she isn't being treated fairly and we're all corrupt, and this is unconstitutional. Not only that, but it explicitly states in your bond conditions that you cannot consume alcohol. So, I cut her off and bring her to the jail. She's still running her mouth during the walk over. I had nothing to say. I had absolutely zero sympathy for her. I could barely hold in my laughter on the walk over to the jail. The confession is my own. The cop said, "You're going 95 miles an hour. Do you know what the speed limit is?" "No." "It's 55 miles per hour." "I'm sorry, sir. I thought it was 65. Not a cop, but I used to read a lot of police reports at my old job. My favorite was a woman who refused a breathalyzer by telling the cop, "I won't blow on that, but I'll blow on your eggplant." In a city near to me, a guy murdered a woman, put her body in a large garment bag, and left her in a vacant lot. Unfortunately for him, he forgot to take the tags with his name and address off the bag from a recent flight. A would-be bank robber wrote his hold-up note and put it in his wallet. He got rattled at the bank and accidentally left his driver's license on the counter when he handed the note to a teller. A third crook just took on more than he could handle and apparently didn't watch the time. He had a long history of Grand Theft Auto and was hospitalized after being badly beaten in the parking lot of a sports area after a lacrosse game. The guy swore up and down that he had no idea why anyone would assault him there. Not that I want to be defending any of these people, but I feel like the stress of committing any of these crimes might overcome a lot of common sense. Personally, I rate my chances of getting away with a crime as less than 0, or maybe this is all a cover. In court, defendant called the judge "Your Majesty" instead of "Your Honor." Friend's daughter and daughter's boyfriend got busted with a kilo of green herb. Friend's daughter says, "Oh, we weren't going to smoke it, we were going to sell it." My boyfriend is a police officer. Last week, he pulled over a drunk driver who ended up speeding off. Car chase back to his house and the drunk guy tells him, "I got home, it's okay, you can go now." Drunk guy continues arguing and it's 3 a.m. so his family wakes up and his son steps out the front porch and yells, "Damn it, Dad, you frickin' idiot, we told you to stop doing this." The serial killer BTK. He used to send taunting letters to the media and to the police about his crimes. He seemingly stopped all activity around 10 years ago when he started to communicate again. He asked the police if he could be traced if he sent them a floppy disk, and they told him no. He sent them a floppy disk, and they recovered data that included his name and his church. He was quickly arrested. My brother-in-law is a cop in a small town. Pulled a car over one night and recognized the kid. Smelled green herb inside the car and said, "Give me the green herb and I won't search your car, won't give you a ticket, and you can be on your way." The kid fights him and says he doesn't know what that smell is. There's no green herb, and "How can I trust that you won't take me to the station if I give it to you?" Brother-in-law promises again that if he hands him the green herb, he'll let him go, no questions asked. Kid keeps being a moron. Brother-in-law searches the car and finds many more substances hidden all over, as well as green herb. Brother-in-law says, "All right, let's go to the station." The kid gets upset and says, "You said you weren't going to do this. See, I couldn't trust you." I groan and laugh every time I think of that. What a dummy. My cop brother told me that this one time he took lunch at Popeyes while in uniform, except for the hat. Once inside, the cashier started taking his order but then stopped halfway and turned to a coworker that just walked up. I don't remember exactly what was said, but basically the guy taking my brother's order asks the other guy if he took his green herb. The other guy says yes, but he didn't smoke at all and proceeds to hand over the green herb. The guy then says, "Cool, not to worry, he's got another stash in his car for emergencies like this." My brother then said that he just wanted to eat some lunch. The guys then realized he was a cop. One guy said something like, "Not again." As my brother started arresting the cashier, he said that he thought my brother was the security guard. So my brother, just trying to make a joke out of it, says, "Oh, you smoke herb with your security guard?" To which the guy says, "No, just my manager and his buddy." But the real funny part was when he asked another employee if the security guard was around, and the employee said they didn't have one and didn't know what the cashier was talking about. What's the most disturbing history you've learned about a house you found on the market? The lady next door to me died and wasn't found until she was more liquid than solid on her living room carpet. The family couldn't pay something back about back taxes or something, and the house went to HUD to auction. HUD paid for some cleanup, but not to replace the carpet, only steam clean it. So it finally sold and was talking to the guy who was flipping it. Before I could mention the death, he asked if the house had a water leak under the foundation, because they ripped up the carpet and pad to put down the new floor, and it was really dirty and got all over them and their clothes. I told him what happened and how HUD went cheap on what to fix before the auction. He got green as a pea and then started emptying his stomach right there on his side of the fence. My grandma sells and rents houses in the Denver area. A few weeks ago, I had to help her evict a few college bros from one of her properties. This is a cottage-style home, no second floor, no basement. These guys literally dug a hole in the wooden floor and made a basement where they've been throwing trash away for the last year. Like, it's a living room with a TV, a couple of armchairs, and a giant hole in the ground filled with ice cream wrappers, pizza boxes, and cigarette butts. That seems like 1,000 times more effort than just taking the fricking garbage out. You know, taking out the garbage is a real pain in the butt. I'm going to perform back-breaking manual labor inside my house to avoid walking 20 feet to the street with a small bag of trash. My parents were realtors and also flipped houses. When I was growing up, I used to help them a lot, usually by cleaning. When I was 12, I was helping with a house that was infested with roaches. I noticed the closets were smeared with crap and children's handprints. There were fingernail scratches on the insides of the doors as well. I asked my parents why this was the case. They told me the old tenants used to lock up their toddlers in the closets for days. How about the one I bought? A young person had drowned in the pool, and so far every person that I've met asks me, "You know what happened there, right?" People are nosy. My mother passed away in my childhood home, which my dad eventually sold. Years later, my brother was picking up the youth group kids, and one teen got in and said, "Our house is haunted. Years ago, a lady died in there." My brother looked her dead in the eye and said, "She was my mom, actually." The poor kid burst into tears immediately. My brother has such a horribly dry sense of humor. Huh. Got a good deal on an apartment because a lady was beaten to death next door. It was an old house converted into separate units. The narrator can't be the only one who would buy a house on the cheap because of a horrible crime there. Bring it on, ghosts! When I was looking for my last house, I went with my wife and realtor to look at several houses. We went to look at one house in particular because it didn't seem like the price they were asking could be real. A huge house sitting on tons of land without buildings and going for millions under market value. We got there and the realtor said, "Oh, I should mention, a serial killer lived here, and when he was put away, cops found 11 bodies on the property. I think owning this house would make me perpetually afraid of coming across a 12th body digging a vegetable patch or something." "Yeah, but you have the perfect alibi for that dead body buried in the backyard." "Yes, Mr. Police Officer, we brought this house from a serial killer. I guess they forgot one body. Whoopsie, don't know how my wife got there at all." "The body's still decomposing. Well, that is really weird." Not that I was buying, but one that I was visiting. I went to visit my sister in California, and once I flew in, I wanted to shower. Well, I took a long enough shower that the mirror was all steamy when I got out, except one tiny dot in the middle of the mirror. My immediate thought process was, oh, weird. I guess if you draw on a mirror with Expo, it won't steam around it. So I went to go investigate, and upon looking right up to it, I realized it was a fricking camera lens. Well, I freaked out and ran out of her room and dressed and then went and told her. We went around the back and looked in the utility closet type thing that looked like it was in line with her room. Sure enough, the drywall had been cut away and repatched at some point. We cut it open, and while there was no camera, there was a little lens still stuck to the mirror. It's real freaky to think whoever was getting actually spied on, and if they ever actually knew. Ugh. I used to rent an apartment that was in a converted Victorian asylum. It was rumored to be haunted, but I never heard or saw anything whilst living there. When I met with the letting agent to hand the keys back at the property and for him to run through a final inspection, he asked if we had been happy there. I said something to the effect of, yes, but we were only moving as the landlord had set it up for sale. It became clear he was after some kind of ghost story as he explained that none of his colleagues liked going to any apartments in the building, because when taking photos to market one of them, the red eye detector kept triggering on his phone when no one was in the frame. The poor guy looked nervous as heck the whole time we were there. This is actually a really common glitch when taking photos in old buildings like this. It's caused by the light reflecting off the red eyes of the unquiet dead roaming the space between this world and the next. I photograph homes. It's normal. People die in homes. I photographed a few homes where the reason for sale was a recent self-deletion in the home. I photographed a new home where the builder ended things with himself in the garage just before the project was complete. The weirdest one was very creepy and suspicious. I photographed a billionaire's compound where the guy had had an absurd fascination with flesh. There were well over 50 heads mounted on walls from water buffalo to elephant, 5 to 10 large cats, all stuffed, chandeliers made from the feathers of rare birds, stools made from elephant feet and legs. They were hairy. Ugh. Paintings and abstract photos of oily skin, veiny muscles of humans and animals, among other things. I looked for his kill room, but I never found it. In general, I find billionaires don't behave like normal people, but this one was particularly weird. The flat opposite my house was occupied for a couple of years by a lovely young man. Long hair, gothic clothing. That might not be the right term for it, but frick it, I'm old. Super polite, if a bit reserved. He self-deleted in the flat one day. I only found out afterwards that he had had a liver transplant some years before and was worried his new liver was failing. I wish I could have helped him. I used to see him at my doctor's surgery. I had a new and sickly baby and was there a lot, and so was he. But we just said hi to each other, how are you, etc. I'm really sad for him. The flat has been occupied since by a succession of young couples. I've never said a word in case it troubles them, but I've tried harder since then to let them know I'm there if they ever need a friend. Being young and just starting out can be very lonely. I eventually heard that there was a secret passageway and stairs between bedrooms on the 2nd and 3rd floors that no one could now find, but it was apparently there, well hidden. I've been in a few where the realtor might have had a hard time selling it after it was fixed. One in particular where the entire family was taken off the mortal coil by the mother, who then set herself on fire in the back utility room. My aunt is a realtor and was selling a house that a lady owned, but it was renting out to her college-age son and a few of her friends. When they went to do the first walkthrough so my aunt could take pictures and such, it was apparent that the lady hadn't been in the house in ages. Every single room had a TV, a chair, a box of Kleenex, and a bottle of lotion. They were literally just spanking the mule with each other all over the house all the time. The lady was so embarrassed. When the sold sign went up on our last house, our neighbor came over and said, "Now you're moving out, would you like to know about your house's history?" It turned out the previous owner was a smack dealer who allowed his customers to shoot up in the living room. That explains the brown, dried blood-colored arcs all over the walls when we stripped the wallpaper. He also used to hire out his old lady from an upstairs bedroom. Incidentally, our bedroom. Lovely. An old friend of mine bought a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. The place is beautiful and has a really nice deck out back with a hot tub. About 3 weeks after closing, he was cleaning out some previously owned junk in one of the closets and found an old DVD. It was a Bridget the Midget adult movie with a hot tub scene on the cover. His hot tub. It was epic. That's not so much creepy as it is a fun fact about where you live. I would for sure be showing that to everyone. After they'd used the hot tub, of course. I've been doing this job a while now. The thing that scares me most is how often I find the locks reversed on bedrooms and basement doors. There's a lot of really crappy parents out there. I've actually done this, and it's because the little kids lock themselves in their rooms all the time. I'm big enough and resourceful enough to escape a room like this, but my kids are not. Once you've tried talking a 3-year-old through turning the little knob a few times and they're freaking out, you flip the doorknob around to prevent it from happening in the future. This isn't so much disturbing as moderately amusing. Just days after closing on my house, a friend of mine who was helping me move in told me he had been in my house many times. Turns out his childhood babysitter had lived there. Then he tells me he just wants to show me something in the backyard, and he leads me to the specific fence post on which he had drawn a wang as a child. I do wonder if he'd actually drawn it that day while I wasn't watching. Something similar happened to me. My grandmother lived in Chicago and needed to sell her house. She actually sold it to my husband's father when my husband was about 3. They ended up moving to Hammond around the time he was 15, roughly about the time I met him. My husband and my mother grew up in the same house and didn't find out about it until 4 years ago. Small world. In Seattle, there was a house just up the block from my work. This was probably around 2007 or so. There was a zombie-themed rave, and said house became the after-party. Most of the club kids knew each other, and the ages ranged from 16 to 21. Unfortunately, they invited this loner dude who came over and started unloading a shotgun at around 6:30 to 7 in the morning. Kids dressed like zombies were pouring out of the house, jumping over fences, into the street, into the backyard. Nobody knew who was actually wounded and who wasn't because everyone looked effed up due to their costume. I think like 6 or 7 people died. It's totally effed and has always stuck with me, probably because it was in my neighborhood which I lived and worked. Eventually, the house went up for sale, and I always wondered how much the prospective buyers knew about what happened there. Houses in Seattle don't stay long on the market, so it had a lot of real estate agents and buyers coming and going. I also wondered if there was a little discount considering its history. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've been in the residential property management industry for 14 years and have managed and leased thousands of apartments and single-family houses. A historic building I used to lease apartments for was formerly an insane asylum, and prior to that was a hospital. The building itself is on the National Historical Registry. Thankfully, I never had a bad experience here except for one unsettling thing in a stairwell, but I did meet people over the years with stories. Anyway, certain things are required for historical landmarks and restoration tax credits in this particular city, so many of the apartments had to maintain certain features of the original design and architecture, like some old tile was still on the walls and floors. The thing that creeped me out was the basement. Even after more than 50 years on most days, you could catch a whiff of formaldehyde. Some days were more pungent and distinct than others. Of course, being the basement, it also had the addition of that musty basement smell. Since this was once a hospital, obviously, it had a morgue. There are a handful of apartments in the basement, and the original tile on the floor marked where the morgue originally started. In one of those apartments, there's a bedroom with incredibly spacious walk-in closets. If you haven't already figured it out, those 2 massive closets are the old body lockers, with the original latches on the walls next to the entrance to the closets. I still for the life of me can't understand how anyone could live in that apartment, because I wouldn't even go into that apartment by myself. These are my 2 most outrageous. I present the tales of the crazy old gynecologist and the adult toy aficionado. The first is short and sweet. A lady wants me to list her house. I go over and do the routine. As I go to the bedroom closet, she yells, "Oh no, don't go in there, it's a horrible mess. It's a walk-in closet, but please don't go in there, it's such a mess and I'm embarrassed." She went on about it way too long for it to just be a mess. I leave it alone and that's that. House gets listed and 2 weeks later I offer to do an open house. The lady has started packing already because I already helped her find a new house. She leaves, I get the open house going, and a nice couple comes in. They go to the master bedroom and there's a wall of boxes in front of the closet. I explain that's a walk-in closet, and last time I was there the lady said it was just filled to the brim with stuff. The wife wants to see the closet. The husband starts moving boxes. I ask him not to and he keeps going, "If I'm going to buy a house, I want to see the whole thing." Well, he kind of had me there because I know they loved everything else about the house, and the wife seemed super stoked about the kitchen and the master bath. The last box is moved and the door is opened. Inside is a 10 by 10 foot room, jam-packed with phallic adult toys. They're each standing up on very nice custom shelving units with glass doors on the front. The glass doors also have numbers made from a home label maker unit. On the inside of the door is a large sheet of paper. Each number has a corresponding name of some guy. That's when we noticed 2 large boxes in the corner. Each box contained 36 unopened Clona Johnson adult toy making kits. We stared in amazement for a while, and then the husband just fricking lost it. It took a good 20 minutes for him to stop laughing, or at least randomly bursting out in laughter. We put everything back the way it was, and that was the end of me letting anyone check out the closet for the rest of the open house. That couple actually ended up buying the house, and since I know everyone will ask, there were 183 homemade statues of eggplants in the closet, and a few store-bought ones too. Now, the other story is the crazy old gynecologist. He asked me to come in and give him a price. He didn't want to sell, but wanted an official market analysis to present in court for his divorce. He offered me $500, so I was happy to come out and write it up for him. First off, I didn't know his profession. He never told me much later until he'd asked me to put doctor and his name on the paperwork, and I asked what kind of doctor he was. Anyway, I show up and the outside of the house looks great. It's super clean, very well maintained for a 70-year-old house, and looks pretty as a picture. I walk in and there's nothing but shelving units lining every single wall. Floor-to-ceiling shelving units. They're also in the middle of every room on the first floor. All of them are loaded with plastic storage bins that are labeled. They all seem to have pretty routine stuff. I'm thinking the guy is just a very organized hoarder. One has boxes and boxes of new pens. One is all rolls of tape. One big one is all toilet paper. As I get further into the house, the storage bins go from office supplies and toiletries to spoons. Just a giant clear storage tub full of random spoons. One is used paper clips. Used paper clips? He's differentiating between new and used ones. Alright, whatever. That's when I notice every room has a TV and a surround sound system, and it's all set up on a shelving unit. This was back when flat screens were like $5,000 and every room had one. Every room also had flying saucers on the ceiling, which he said were repeaters so he could change every TV to the same channel at the same time. I must admit, that was pretty cool. In any case, we go upstairs and it's a mess. The shelving units were all along the walls, but not in the middles of the rooms. And he's got a toaster in the middle of the bedroom floor with a bag of butternut bread next to it and a plate with a mushy stick of butter that looked like it was a week old. It had that sick yellow crystallized look to it. There were books all over the floor and it looked like he just sat on the floor reading and eating toast. Everything was sprawled out in a perfect circle around where he'd sit. That's when I noticed the clear storage tubs were much stranger up here. One entire rack was used tissues. Another several boxes were lubricant. A couple were speculums. Then I realized there were a lot of boxes of tissues, new and used, around his little toast and book circle. I took my measurements and couldn't help but look at some of the titles on his bookshelf. The two that stand out the most were Doing the Deed by Yourself and Show Me. I mostly remember Show Me because it was a very controversial book when I was a kid. It's basically a published book of borderline illegal material disguised as a life skills book. Everything else on the wall of books was also related to this kind of material. And we're not even close to done. I walked into this other bedroom and realized how dark it was. He had tinfoil taped in the windows to black out the room. It was filled with computers on a giant custom-built horseshoe desk. If I recall, there were 8 or 9 screens wrapping around the room, in addition to 2 big flat-screen TVs. As I measured the room, I noticed more tissues and several boxes of new tissues. The screensavers were all showing slideshows of either undressed women or women in bathing suits. I say nothing and we move on. And here's where it gets weird. Oh, you thought we were past the weird stuff? Hold on to your hat. He takes me to the basement. It's a dungeon. Not some flashy, sanitized adult dungeon either. This was dark, dank, and musty. 2 cages in 2 corners, some kind of crucifixion cross with restraints, some weird table with restraints, a full wall of whips and chains and needles. One featured a paddle that had tacks sticking out of it. Swings for doing the deed of varying sorts hanging on the rafters. A wooden trough filled with what I hope was water. There was also a coffin, a rack, an Iron Maiden, and stocks. You know, like the medieval head and hands town square punishment device. Every wall, support, and piece of furniture had some kind of restraints on it, and he walked me through as if nothing was strange about this. And the coup de grace, he shows me the utility room and then shows me his secret room, where the door was disguised as paneling on the back wall of the laundry room. Inside looked like a dungeon out of a fricking horror movie. A giant shelving unit filled with VHS tapes was along one wall. A computer desk with a computer and old-school video editing machines, I assume, boxes of his favorite tissues all over the editing station. Then there was a brass bed with restraints. There were no sheets on the bed, and it was horribly stained with God only knows what. Not blood, though. I probably would have called the cops if I saw blood on it. There was a mirror above the bed with a microphone dangling and 2 VHS cameras on tripods trained right on the bed. This guy acted like all of this was totally normal. He was like, "Oh, and here's the secret room. I like to come down here to relax. It's just so quiet down here and it feels so safe because it's just hidden away from the rest of the house. If someone ever breaks in, I'd come down here and they'd never even know to look here." No mention whatsoever of the obvious use of this room. Screwing? Tickling the pickle? Murder? The unspeakable act? I have no fricking clue. I collected my $500 and got the F out of there as fast as I could. No one believed me back at the office, and you know what? I don't believe them either. I wouldn't have believed myself if I'd heard it from someone else. I'm guessing he's dead now since he was, here's the kicker, probably about 75 to 80 years old, and this was about 15 years ago. His age and frailty, in addition to my morbid curiosity, was probably the only reason I didn't take off immediately. I remember thinking in my head, keep your guard up, you're going to F this old dude up if you have to. That was one terrifying visit I'll never forget. It's also the only time I didn't shake a customer's hand as I was leaving. My hand still tingles when I think about the introductory handshake and all those clear tubs filled with used tissues. Well, words are failing the narrator. My God. What do you even say or do in that sort of situation? I only wonder what the inheritor or buyer of that house had to do with the thousands of dollars worth of equipment. Anyway, on to our last few stories. Not a realtor, happened to some friends who brought a property. Very old site, about 300 years old, which had been part of a convent, the living area of the nuns specifically. The aforementioned place had been refurbished as small apartments and houses about 50 years ago. They went to live there and there was some maintenance given to certain places of the property, the common areas. There was a wall which was slightly wider than the others. They began to give maintenance to that wall, but the outer layer fell apart due to the rain and old age. While trying to fix that, they found dozens of skeletons of babies, very little babies, and very old little skeletons. Well, authorities and historians came and went by, and they came to the conclusion that the nuns tossed their babies there right after giving birth to them. God knows if they were alive or dead by then. Not unheard of, old religious orders were very strict about that, and then there were even more gruesome policies regarding nuns' pregnancies. My uncle bought a caravan down the coast on a well-known beach. Just prior to selling it, police detectives turned up and turned the place upside down and inside out, looking for some sort of information. Turns out the family of one of Australia's most notorious serial killers used to own the caravan many years ago. What ways have you seen someone hilariously fail using an everyday item? My 90-year-old grandmother was teed off at some other 70-year-olds cooking for a church because they were trying to peel eggs with a vegetable peeler. Witnessed multiple people ask why north just moved on a compass after they'd rotated 90 degrees. I really suck at land navigation and compasses and azimuths and all that stuff, but reading this made me feel like a land nav genius. When a friend and I were in Rome, we were in a restroom and we couldn't figure out how to turn on the sink. We looked for handles, we checked if it had a motion sensor, nothing. Just when we were about to give up hope, I saw a small rubber dome under each sink. I decided to step on it and voila, water. The best part was that there was a man waiting to wash his hands who probably thought that we were the two biggest idiots in the world. We went to the UK this summer and met our first electric shower. Could not figure out how to turn it on until we accidentally flipped the switch in the hallway, and voila! Feels dumb in retrospect, but it was completely foreign to us, literally and figuratively. I worked with someone who genuinely did not know how to use paper clips. He was really embarrassed when someone called him out on not knowing and showed him how. I worked with someone that would hole punch the top left corner, then put the paperclip in like a keychain. After years of using family's Windows 98, I upgraded the family with an old but gold computer. My mother rang me 3 times in the next 2 weeks because she couldn't find the power button. Why? Because the old computer had a big red power button, and the new computer was broken because it had a big blue power button in the exact same spot. I don't even work in IT, and I've considered using the Internet Explorer icon for a Chrome or Firefox browser just to get some older people I know to stop using Internet Explorer. For my dad, I just renamed Chrome to Internet. It's pretty effective so far. I did this with my 72-year-old uncle. I removed Internet Explorer from the desktop and set the Firefox icon to that of the IE one, and named it Internet Explorer. I set up some great add-ins and bookmarks, and then only gave him a user account and set up Chrome Remote Desktop. I went from fixing it almost weekly to maybe twice a year. 5 out of 7 would recommend. My father is fast approaching his pension and is far more computer savvy than I am, hanging my head in shame. I watched someone try to light the base of a firecracker, as in the end without the fuse. To be honest, it is a bit of a miracle that the guy that did that is still in one piece. I saw someone park his bike on the sidewalk and then painstakingly hang his bike lock on one of the handlebars. Then he just walked away. When I was in college, whenever I couldn't find a bike rack, I would just park it and lock the front wheel to the frame, then sit somewhere inside where I could see it. In the cafeteria one time, someone tried to steal it by riding away and tossed themselves over the handlebars. Pretty entertaining. I once, as a child, thought that one of those long lighters for candles was a curling iron, proceeded to burn the crap out of my ear and hair. I saw someone open a milk carton by cutting the top off with a knife. First time this kid stayed away from home without parents, he thought an iron worked just by being a heavy metal thing to flatten the clothes into submission. Didn't realize you could turn it on to heat it up or anything like that. I remember sitting at a bus stop opposite a pair of escalators that were the wrong way to standard traffic. Every third person went up the down escalator. I go up about 4 escalators every day. Sometimes they change the direction so the right escalator comes down and the left goes up for no apparent reason other than to mess with the people. And mess with the people they do. Everyone, like me, who's stuck in their routine in the morning, will try to go up the usual escalator only to have people come their way and almost bump into them. Can opener. Twisted so hard they fell sideways off their chair. A time or dozen back in my days of working on a forklift, after a long night when I'd get into my car, I'd start it and promptly put on the left blinker and rev the engine trying to back it up. One day was particularly bad and it took me a few moments to put it all together. I've seen someone so incompetent with a can opener that every can they opened looked like a Pillsbury biscuit canister. I've got one of those can openers that you can just lay on top and cleanly opens the can with no sharp edges. I've never had it not work. You can literally just lay it on there and turn the crank really easily. It's so easy and requires less effort than a normal can opener. My wife cannot operate it. I've explained it multiple times. She brought a crappy old style one that creates throwing stars every time you use it. I thought those types of can openers were foolproof until I got one that refused to grip the edge. I had to try so hard to convince my significant other that they were the superior can openers, only to have to later agree to getting a sideways one after an unfortunate incident with a can of lima beans. I felt so betrayed, and now he doesn't trust my opinion on any kitchenware. A shovel. I saw someone put their foot up on it, ready to push down, and then just topple sideways. Holy moly! Actually, no holy moly. Back in the 90s, when I tried to show my mother how to use my home PC, she picked up the mouse and pointed it at the screen like a remote control. A lady of a certain age had her first computer and tried to operate the mouse on the floor with her foot. Her only frame of reference was a sewing machine, which was operated with a foot pedal. You know, she had a reference and she tried for it. I can be happy when old people do that rather than just blame me for breaking it. I know someone who was running late to work and his polyester polo shirt was still wet from the washer. What did he do? Put it in the dryer for 5 minutes? Use a hairdryer? No. He whacked it into the microwave and put it on for a couple of minutes. Nice and warm when he got it out. A trip to the emergency department and second-degree burns later, and he was a changed man. I had a college student who once set his apartment on fire because he put his wet clothes in the oven to dry, and then immediately left to go to Six Flags. One of his roommates fortunately came home before the fire got out of hand. A family member in the early days of polyester got a stain on her skirt at work. She took off her skirt, cleaned it, and dried it, but the whole thing melted in the dryer. She laughed and made a skirt out of a magazine and wore that home. One guy at a breakfast buffet got to the bacon tray. He took a pair of tongs and held them backwards, as in the part which you're supposed to grab bacon with, in his hand, and pinched it closed so only a slit was left between the two rods, trying to slide the bacon in between the prongs. I had to help him after watching this for 2 minutes. This was a grown man, by the way. I went to a Chinese restaurant once and had a good giggle at the two women at the next table, expressing how great the learner chopsticks were, despite clearly struggling with them. It was cheap wooden chopsticks and they hadn't even snapped them apart. Saw someone trying to staple some pages together without a stapler, just going at it with a single staple in hand. Did they manage it though? After about 20 minutes of struggle, they had something that vaguely resembled a stapled document. So, yeah, I guess so. I'm going to assume that by vaguely resembled, they mean was a gross parody of. There was no way that was a tidy or satisfactory document, or stable. I wouldn't necessarily call this a fail, but more of a success. Went to the beach with family and my cousin was on watermelon duty. She starts cutting the watermelons and says, "Man, it's so hard to cut this." I turn around and she's using the wrong side of the knife, but she had already cut the watermelon into like 4 pieces. She's known as not being the brightest person out there, but I was still surprised at her superhuman strength. I went to the library high on green herb and I swiped my student ID through the automatic stapler. Now, every time I go to the library, I have to explain why I can't swipe my card through the card reader. An egg. I took a cake decorating class. In 12 weeks, this woman never figured out how to crack a raw egg. Every single time, she crushed it, no matter what advice she got or how many times she was shown. In high school, we had to do a cooking class. A guy in my group tried to peel a boiled egg and ended up with the shell and all of the white part of the egg in the trash, and presented the spherical hard-boiled yolk on the plate as the finished product. When I was a kid, we would laugh when my mum would try to play Mario Bros. On Nintendo and she would try to jump lifting up the controller. Now, I try to play Nintendo Wii with my son and he laughs at me because I forget to jump by raising up the controller. She truly was ahead of her time. One of my roommates once failed to make the Kraft instant mac and cheese bowls twice. The first time he didn't take the lid off and just YOLO'd the whole thing into the microwave. On the second attempt, he put in nowhere near enough water, there's a line on the inside showing you where to fill it up to, and he got a second helping of burnt pasta. And I got a microwave that smelled like burnt pasta for a week. He had a bachelor's in engineering, a bachelor's in applied mathematics, and a master's in applied mathematics, and he couldn't make Easy Mac designed for 12-year-olds. Not someone else, but myself. I constantly fail at ripping cling film or tinfoil correctly. In the case of tinfoil, I always struggle to rip it in the first place, and then when I do, I leave a weird tail on the end of the roll instead of a clean line. Same thing with cling wrap, but then it proceeds to cling to itself and nothing else, so I wind up with a bunch of awkward balls of it. I'm just trying to cover my soup, guys. My fiancé can't use a toaster. It's either lightly toasted or Satan. There's no in between. I've shown her numerous times. Same result. Would sir like his toast raw or carbonized? Raw toast? Do you mean bread, my dude? Maybe she's so bad at the toaster it comes out as dough? Sometimes when I'm in a hurry, I'll start pulling my car door before I reach the handle and it sends me into a backward stumble. Gotta look around and see if anyone was watching at those moments. Occasionally, I'll get too close and pull the door open straight into my own face because my mornings are difficult for me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not so much hilarious, but a great example of humans using logic without understanding the true meaning. I was in Portugal, in Lisbon, at a better-than-decent hotel. There was a couple in front of the elevator looking up at the floor indicator in a way that we presumed this was a new thing for them. We were on the ground floor. The male of the other party saw the elevator was above us and pushed the down button to bring it to him. The elevator came, they got on, but we didn't. As the elevator left for the parking garage, I pushed the up button. I still remember the look of mild confusion on their faces when we met again. It was flawless logic, that's just not how elevators work. Pushing the directional button in the direction you want to travel instead of the direction the elevator has to travel to reach you is not necessarily obvious. Much like the people who drive grey cars in light fog, they often don't realize that turning on your lights isn't so that they can see the road, it's so that other people can see their car. Sometimes I'll start reaching for the button on my keys to unlock my front door. I once called my cousin to bring my extra set of car keys to me because the remote button stopped working. She suggested using the actual key to unlock the actual handle. I've never felt stupider. Back in primary school, while waiting at something akin to reception, I don't remember exactly where this happened, I saw a kid about 7 or 8 years old accompanied by a teacher taking nibbles from an unpeeled banana. He was trying to play it off like he enjoyed the taste, going, and trying not to cringe. I think the teacher had to point it out to him that it's meant to be peeled. He was the kind of chavvy kid that got in trouble a lot, and the teacher was with him for some kind of supervisory help. I don't remember much about him other than whenever I saw him about school, I'd think of him as that moron who pretends to like eating banana peels. A soda machine, the kind where you press your cup against the lever to make the soda come out. I was at my local burger joint waiting for my order when I saw a middle-aged gentleman walk up to the soda machine with a cup in hand. He placed his cup under the spout and pressed the logo part on top. Nothing came out. He pressed harder. No soda. Undeterred, he changed spouts to try a different soda. Maybe this one was out. Nope. He comes back to the original spout and pressed the top portion so hard with his entire hand that somehow his cup and machine got tilted for long enough for a few drops of soda to come out. He takes his cup with a few drops of soda and leaves. Many moons ago, while working at an electronics store, a woman came in furious because we sold her a useless phone. After talking her down to where she would explain the issue, we found out that she didn't want a cell service plan, so she bought a cordless phone, never connected the base to the phone line, and thought she could just use the cordless receiver as a cell phone. Then there was the guy that returned a microphone, saying he was getting shocks from holding it. I opened the box to find out that he'd cut off the plug that goes into the amplifier and put on a regular wall power plug. It turned out that he didn't know that you need an amplifier and speakers. He thought that you just plug a microphone into any old outlet anywhere and suddenly you have a loud booming voice. As a working voiceover, I'm looking at my Rode NT1 and imagining myself just severing the mic cable in the same way that this gentleman did, and it's hurting both my wallet and my brain. Working in IT. Please reboot your computer. What does that mean? Just turn the computer off and turn it back on again. 5 seconds later, okay, done. Wait, that was quick. I pressed the power button, it turned off, and it came back on. Are you pressing the power button on the monitor? You didn't say monitor. What's a monitor? You see the screen? Not that button. Press the power button on the box that the screen connects to. On the modem? Yeah, sure. Okay, Windows has that startup screen. Fantastic, that's what we need. Idiot! Why have you wasted my time? You should have used the right words. It's working now. I thought you were IT. This happens more than you would think. Nah, it's fine. Computers have only been around in more or less their current form and UI for around 20 years. You expect people to familiarize themselves with the basics of ubiquitous technologies in only 2 decades? Sheesh. Saw someone slide a cheese grater to grate the cheese instead of just sliding the cheese. This was a big grater, so it wasn't really practical to move the grater. I'd have to say cinnamon. One fall day, I decided to make myself some hot cocoa. My husband at the time, now ex, saw me making some and decided he wanted to make some too. I decided I wanted to go all out. I added whipped cream, then sprinkled some sugar and cinnamon on top. It looked so good. I even put a cinnamon stick in it to make it look extra gourmet. All my husband saw was that I had cinnamon sprinkled on top, and there were cinnamon sticks out on the counter. So I sat on the couch to enjoy my cocoa and I heard, how do you do it? And I turned around to see him holding a cinnamon stick and gently shaking it over the top of the whipped cream. I couldn't stop laughing. I once had a roommate who offered to help me make a fridge pie. We'd both just moved in and didn't have everything we needed yet, so I asked her to whip cream with a large fork and even showed her how to do it. I go to do something else for a few minutes, then turn to see if she's done whipping the cream yet. She was just moving the fork slowly back and forth an inch or so in each direction, in a straight line. When I turned to her, she complained that it's not working, and that we really need an electric beater to whip cream. I giggled and said she has to do it really fast and in larger strokes to incorporate the air, and demonstrated again. She then threw the bowl and fork down in a huff and said, "Oh, I give up," and stormed out of the kitchen. It was the first warning sign, really. My mother-in-law has struggled with the tea kettle as well as a pram. The kettle has a button to open the spout. Hold down the button, spout lid pops up, and you can pour the boiling water into your cup. Somehow, she was trying to push the button from the side and then turning the kettle over until nearly upside down to get it to pour, because the lid was not in fact opening using this method, causing very hot water to spit out all around but not actually into the cup. She did this several times, all while making frustrated noises and burning herself with the wayward tea water. I finally managed to get her to put the kettle down and showed her how to press the button on the top instead of on the side. I know they also make kettles with sliding buttons that you push from side to side, but this is usually evident right away, or at least after the first failed attempt. Not for mother-in-law, who upends a full, very hot kettle anyway. And then there was the case of the pram versus the tree. Walking along pushing an empty pram, because no one in their right mind would let her push a pram with a baby in it, she was confronted by a tree and its rather large roots. She proceeds to back up a step and then charge forward at speed, but still the roots resist her efforts. Cue to the mad woman pulling the pram back and slamming it into the roots several times while bystanders look on in horror. Assuming there's a child within, one woman shouts and starts to run over to rescue the child who's not actually there, which gives mother-in-law the added adrenaline needed for one final grand slam, sending the pram flying over the roots and straight into the trunk of the tree. And that's why grandma isn't allowed near small children. My husband has cooked exactly 3 times in the decade of our marriage. Each was a disaster, but the final straw was when he tried to make ramen. We were at an Airbnb that didn't have a kettle, so I told him he'd have to boil the water in a pot. I noticed that the water is boiling, but he's just standing there. I asked what he was doing, the water was ready, and he says, "Isn't it supposed to whistle?" The man was used to hearing a stovetop kettle whistling when the water boiled and thought the water itself, by some mysterious mechanism, whistled when boiled. I have a friend who is literally a genius. This guy finished standard university-level math by his early teens and is now into the stuff you need an advanced degree just to work with. Brain the size of a planet. And there was the time he called me in a panic because he'd locked himself inside a house. He couldn't find the key, you see? It was so funny I was tempted to leave him there. The fact of the matter is that this house didn't even have a locking deadbolt, which is why it's a funny story. It wouldn't be interesting at all if he was actually locked inside. Give me some credit here. My father has a PhD, countless professional publications, teaches at a prestigious graduate-level program, and is generally a super smart guy. He cannot drive in reverse or use basic hand tools to save his life. Push and pull doors. Every time anyone was affronted with one ever. I work in a restaurant and I remember dropping a plate of food to my table as well as leaving them a peppermill per their request. As I'm standing at the bar casually surveying the dining room, I see the guy at my table attempt to navigate grinding pepper onto his plate. Unsuccessfully. He's turned it upside down and is shaking it vigorously all while inspecting his progress. Eventually, he sets it down, seemingly satisfied with his results, I suppose. Then his tablemate picks it up and simply grinds some pepper onto her food. My cat tried to jump onto a kitchen stool. He didn't see that there was a tray placed on top, and for a brief moment, he and it flew, magic carpet style. I saw a woman trying to use a kitchen broom to sweep 3 feet of snow from her car. She was sweeping it right in front of her car. Best part was her dumb boyfriend using the broom tray to remove the snow from the top of the car and tossing it right where she was sweeping from. This went on for about 30 minutes, and then they went back inside. In the late 90s, I showed my dad how to use a search engine. I left the room for no more than 5 minutes before he started cursing wildly. My dad, being in construction, searched stud finders for his first search. Embarrassingly, there have been multiple times where I've tried to apply the 2-finger zoom functionality to a paper map. It's become such a second nature with electronic devices that sometimes it just happens reflexively. Me. I thought French presses were fancy and connoisseurs used them, so they must be some tricky, nuanced way to make coffee. I had to use one once and I realized it was actually very simple. You just separate the grounds by lifting them out of the coffee. So I poured water in, pushed down the filter, then spread the grinds on top. My sister came in and face-palmed. What's the most entitled behavior you've seen from a passenger on an airline? Every so often we get the odd straggler who boards last, who finds a vacant seat in first or business, thinking that we won't know that they're from coach. "Excuse me, sir, I might need to see your boarding pass." "Sorry, your seat is 58A, not 1A." But I'm so tall. I need the legroom. Awkward silence. I saw this being given as advice on Twitter recently. This freelance guy who travels a lot decided to share his pro tips for long flights. A lot of it was just about seat posture and stretching and such, but then one tip was to always be the last person on the plane so you have your choice of open seat. Yeah, no, that's a great way to have nowhere for your bags and still get the same seat you were assigned. My girlfriend's mum is a flight attendant. One time, a woman got quite angry because her daughter spilled apple juice all over and there was not a clothes dryer on the plane for her daughter's sweater. Not an attendant, but was on a flight with really bad turbulence. It went on for about 10 minutes, then the old lady next to me reaches up and presses her button. The attendant walked over to see if the woman was okay, and the woman began to yell at the attendant for the rough flight, and that she'd been flying her whole life and clearly the pilot has no idea what he's doing. The stewardess just walked away. Once got stranded at Newark for 22 hours after our flight had an unfixable fault and was cancelled late at night. We got put up in a hotel, but understandably by the time the new flight rolled around, earliest they could fit in a new flight, everyone was quite tired and agitated. As we were waiting to board the new flight, the flight attendant announces they would be boarding people with additional needs and families with young children first, followed by first class, then premium economy, etc. All the pretty standard stuff. Obviously, it can take a bit longer for people in wheelchairs to board, so it makes sense for them to go first. It's common on most airlines, I believe. Anyway, this business dude races to the front of the crowd and starts yelling at an attendant, saying it was already disgusting that he had lost a day due to their incompetence, and now he had to wait even longer despite being a first-class passenger and paying big bucks every year to fly with them. The worst part was he was looking at the others in the crowd to back him up. Like it was perfectly reasonable to scream at this woman who, like us, had also been stranded and most likely had had very little sleep and was doing her best to do her job in this difficult situation. But she was awesome. Without missing a beat, she smiled and nodded and said, "Okay, sir," then made a big point of leaning into her mic and telling the waiting line of people in wheelchairs and mothers with babies that this gentleman needed to board before them and could they please wait. Literally every single person at the gate is looking at this guy with disgust on his face as he tries to backtrack and says he doesn't mind waiting for the first group, but the attendant says, No, you've made yourself quite clear, let's get you boarded and the others will have to wait. He's humiliated as he sheepishly walks by. She handled it perfectly. Frick yes, stewardess, frick yes. In what universe do you think I'm the good guy for saying this kind of thing? Also, this is not going to get him into the destination any quicker. The only thing he's speeding up is the transition between his airport chair and the chair on the plane. Not one specific passenger, but a type of behavior I've unfortunately seen too much of. A couple will book separate seats, the man in premium economy seat with extra legroom, and the woman in a normal economy seat. The woman will then play the sad sack and ask another passenger to give up their comfy seat so they can sit together. If the other passenger refuses, usually because they paid extra and don't fit a regular seat, some will even complain to the crew to make them move the other passenger. All of this to save a few bucks on the second premium seat. Seeing as a lot of people asked, no, crew don't move passengers because they're sitting next to someone else's spouse, and certainly not from a premium economy seat. This drives me insane. I once had a man get very heated because he was on the plane with his wife and 4 children and did not pre-select seats. And he wanted me to switch my window seat for a middle seat in a different row so his family could all be together. But I paid extra to pre-select my window seat. It was only like $15, but why should I have to give up what I paid for just because you wanted to save money and assumed others would rearrange themselves for you and your family? The flight attendant sided with me and the 6'4" guy who was in the aisle seat of my row, who also didn't want to move and was much more assertive than me, and the family was spread throughout the cabin. Mid-90s, there was this kid in customs, Toronto to Houston flight, who was going nuts. He was driving people crazy in the departure area. On the flight, he had a full-sized metal Tonka truck that he was running up and down the aisle with. He smacked me on the head and nearly hit my mum in front of me. I grabbed it before he could hit my very frail and on blood thinner's mum and gave it to a crew member who refused to give it back to the family. The family refused to seat him until it was announced that there would be no food or beverage service until the aisle was cleared. Another woman grabbed the kid and returned him to his family. They let him run loose again as soon as the service was over. Finally, someone from the cockpit had to come back and tell the family we couldn't start the landing approach until the brat was in his seat. They put him in his seat, screaming bloody murder the whole time. As soon as descent started, they let him up and he was running up and down the aisle as we landed. The family was so dense that when the captain ordered everyone to stay in their damn seats, and that only families with small children would be allowed to deplane first, they smirked their way down the aisle. My mum walked with a cane and the crush getting off was hard for her. Since we were home, we just waited till the aisles were clear. When we got off, you could hear the kids screaming halfway down the jetway. A police officer was holding him and the rest of the family, I'm guessing mum, dad, and 2 grandparents, were all in handcuffs. I once watched a very well-dressed businessman have an epic toddler-level tantrum at a check-in counter when he was advised that his flight was delayed due to fog. He literally screamed and jumped up and down and demanded that the airline better do something about it or else. The guy working behind the counter just smirked and suggested that the business guy was welcome to go outside and try to flap the fog away with his arms. The entire queue burst out laughing. I was on a plane at the Burbank airport and a family that was on standby boarded the plane without being told that they'd be on the flight. They proceeded to go passenger to passenger trying to get people to deboard the plane so they can use their standby tickets. They argued with the flight attendants. It was at least 45 minutes of us sitting on a plane on a runway, listening to this family of buttholes argue about how they need to be on this flight because they have somewhere to go. I was on my way home from Vegas and was hungover, and I don't think I've ever wanted to punch someone more than I did in that moment. A few years back, I had a 7-hour flight and a kid was sitting behind me who kept kicking the seat. I decided to just wait, maybe he'll eventually stop. Nope. It went on for about an hour until I couldn't take it anymore. 10 years of my regular flying, and this was the first time I called and complained to an air hostess. She apologized to me and asked the family behind me to keep it down. They just stared at her and did nothing. The moment she turned away, the little craphead started kicking against me again, and I couldn't take it anymore and turned back and said loudly to the family, "Could you please make him stop doing that?" The father, I presume, said sorry and still did nothing. The kid kept on, so finally I called the flight attendant and asked her if there was any other seat available because they're not listening or have no common decency, pointing to the family behind me. She came back after a few minutes and proceeded to take me to the first class. My first experience in the luxury section. The worst thing was she kept apologizing to me and I kept asking her to stop and that it wasn't her fault. It was just weird. Also, F those butthole families. I'm not sure this would happen these days. I feel like airlines have got tighter about letting people just move into the champagne and caviar zone. Please, if you have any modern-day accounts of this happening, share them in the comments below. I was a kid flying out to Utah to start my teen tour. About halfway through the flight, departing out of New York, the captain got on the speaker to announce an engine had failed and we needed to make an emergency landing in Chicago. Needless to say, we got a little concerned. Except for one passenger who stormed up to the flight attendant and explained she was a nanny and needed to get to Utah to attend to the children she took care of. I'm not exactly sure what she was hoping for, that the pilot, upon hearing a babysitter was on board, would risk the lives of everyone else to fly us all through, or that the flight attendant would be so moved by this story that she would climb out on the wing and repair the engine mid-flight. Alas, there was no emergency jetpack to give this passenger to blast away from the plane to get to Utah on time, and she was told to sit down. Was on a Vegas to Boston flight when a passenger passed away in his sleep. The whole situation was heartbreaking and the flight attendants were clearly shaken. We stopped in New York for emergency personnel to attend to him. The whole process was very quick and the pilot and staff handled it like champs. Just as we were about to take off, the guy in the front row asks the attendant if we'd all get free drinks due to the inconvenience. I've never wanted to yell at a stranger so much in my life. The next day I got an email from the airline with a $50 voucher to apologize. I didn't want it nor expect it and wondered if it happened because some idiot complained about the diversion. I did tweet the airline to compliment the staff on their handling of the situation. They deserved it. I didn't say what the situation was, just the flight number. I figured they'd figure it out. Flight attendant, can you please open your blind all the way? It's regulation for landing. Passenger, no, I want it closed. This goes on for a minute. Passenger is using his tone to assert that he refuses to open it. Flight attendant speedwalks to the handset and her voice comes on over the PA. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to play some trivia today. The question is, why do we keep the blinds open during takeoff and landing? And without letting anyone answer, she jumps right into, it's so that we can all keep an eye on the outside of the plane for safety. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I fly a lot, and I was on one of those planes where half the plane were ignoring the rules and stuff. When we touched down, these people immediately got up, walking around and taking their bags out of the overheads. Mind you, the plane hasn't parked. It's literally just touched the ground on the landing strip, so it's still moving, and it's dangerous for half the people on the plane to be messing around. And even worse, taking all their heavy bags down around everyone else's heads. The flight attendants are now desperately trying to get these people to sit down until the plane stops moving, and some people were waving their hands at them dismissively. I think the captain heard the commotion and the flight attendant half yelling, because all of a sudden the plane did a very abrupt stop, which knocked over all the people standing up and then continued on its way to park. The flight attendant then said, "This is exactly why we have rules." Yeah, all those people stood up and looked real sheepish. I remember being an unruly little kid who wouldn't put my seatbelt on in the car, so my mother would just slam on the brakes, making my face hit the seat, and this is exactly how I imagine the situation you just described. I had someone have a meltdown because I had to have them properly stow their wedding dress. The thing was massive and spilling into the aisle, blocking seats of the entire row. They may have had to pay the hotel to get the wrinkles out, but I likely saved them from shoe prints and beverage cart rollers going back and forth over it. Still, she was in tears and I was not going to risk others' safety, including my own. My future sister-in-law brought a ticket for her dress to fly in a seat for her wedding. She of course went through the correct steps to do this, called the airline to see if she could even do that, got a gate pass for it, had to go through the metal and body line for TSA and it counted as her carry-on. Had to pick up a special boarding pass, early boarding, and it got the window seat so no one could trip over it in an emergency. If Southwest had said no, she couldn't do it, then she would have just driven her dress, but everyone was super accommodating and even gave all of us a bottle of champagne to celebrate. We did share the bottles with another wedding party that was flying out who didn't get the special treatment. My mum was a flight attendant in her 20s. I asked her for a story. Her first week flying, there was a group of drunk men on the flight. At one point, when returning to quiet them down again, one of the fellows had his Johnson out on full display for all, in its flaccid glory. She says to him very politely and a bit taken aback, "Why don't you put that away now?" And this drunken man flat out says to her, "Why don't you put it away for me?" with the most revolting smug smile on his face. My mum says, in her exact words, "I'd be happy to do that for you, but you'd never be able to use it again." My mum has always had the most ridiculous stories that always turn out to be true, and I'll take her word for this one. Threatening castration on a paying customer is in this case completely justified. If they're exposing themselves on a plane, I feel, let's get that written up in all the airplane's handbooks. I was on a flight from New York City to Portland International Airport. Only empty seat was next to me, a middle seat. Bulkhead, but the kind where there isn't a wall, just the first-class seats in front of us. Door is about to close when a large, sweaty man comes running into the plane to claim the empty seat. He was carrying a full-size pizza box. All the overhead bins were already closed and full, but that didn't stop him proceeding to open them to find a place to stash his pizza. The stewardess kindly informed him that he couldn't put his pizza in an overhead bin. "But it'll get stepped on," he gruffly informs her. She proceeded to tell him to take his seat and put the pizza in front of him. He told her that he flies with pizza all the time and has never been treated this way. He persisted, but as their argument was getting pretty heated, he finally succumbed and put the pizza under the seat in front of him and sat down. The stewardesses have now started the safety, video, and demonstration, and he pulls out a flip phone and proceeds to make a call. I can tell he's going through menus, so I'm thinking he's calling Delta to complain. Nope, turns out to be his landline phone company. He had been late paying his bill and was trying to get them to waive the late fee. They wouldn't. He's arguing with them. Plane has pushed back from the gate and is headed toward the runway at this point. Stewardess comes over and tells him he needs to put his phone away now. He motions with his hand to say 1 minute. "No sir, it needs to be put away now." He flips it shut dramatically mid-sentence and puts it in his pocket. Stewardess is back at the front of the plane. He then decides to stretch. I'm pretty much plastered to the wall as he tries to stay out of his way as he extends his arms up and then to the side, etc., and then twists in his seat back and forth, clearly agitated. He then extends his arms up, stretches out his fingers, and proceeds to crack his knuckles very expressively, one at a time. Sort of like a primary school bully would do on the playground before they were going to kick your butt. In that whole knuckle-cracking process, he flips a middle finger toward the flight attendant. I didn't notice her reaction as I was just waiting to get the 6-hour flight underway and over with. Next thing I know, I can tell we're pulling back to the gate. Flight attendants prepare for arrival and cross-check. Message. Door opens, cockpit door opens, captain comes to our row. Sir, I understand you are harassing my flight attendant. I need you to leave the plane now. The pizza man attempted to argue and even asked me and other neighboring passengers if we had witnessed anything. Clearly the pilot wasn't budging on his decision, so the guy got his pizza off the floor and left the plane. Door closed and we departed. Empty seat next to me. A dozen years ago, I flew from Chicago to Israel. Very long flight with a stop in the middle, with a woman who didn't seem to understand that everyone around her was in the same situation she was in. She dropped a number of passive-aggressive gems over the course of our day together, but the worst one was right when we were being seated for the first leg. The plane was one of those 3-seat, 5-seat, 3-seat setups with aisles on each side of the 5-seat section, and this woman was seated in the middle of the 5-seat section. But you can't seat me in the middle. What if I need to get up and walk around and the people next to me are asleep? I'll be very uncomfortable for this the whole flight. Wow, lady, you figured out why flying kind of sucks all by yourself. Now sit down and start pretending you're not here like the rest of us. Currently a flight attendant flying 5 years for a legacy carrier. I have a few that pop into my head. One was that I was working a quick turn at the end of a 3-dayer, and we had a medical emergency in first class where a passenger passed out. We had to give him CPR and hook him up on an AED. So 2 of us were with the man and the other flight attendant was paging a doctor and communicating with the captain. While this was going on, a passenger in the first row of the main cabin, who can clearly see everything going on, kept paging for a Coke and getting very upset that we wouldn't serve him. Finally, a commuting flight attendant stepped in for us and had a word with him. Another one was actually my last trip, when a woman who boarded towards the end, sitting in row 10A, who left her bag in the aisle blocking everyone else trying to get on, because she was looking for a place for her bag. She found a spot towards the back, and put her hand in the air and started snapping and hollering at me to get her bag for her. I went up to her and told her to get her bag out of the aisle. She got in my face and demanded that I needed to put it up, to which I answered that I couldn't lift her bag for her and she threw a fit. Finally, a nice gentleman helped her. Anyway, after boarding, she accused me of stealing her first scarf. I didn't. Then she called me a blonde B-word. She was removed. I had a lady another time get mad at me because I wouldn't give her my personal food I brought from home and paid for with my own money. She said she was hungry and she needed it. Nope. Another flight, I had a man and his small kid on a flight, and he, during boarding, asked me for one of the first-class meals I was preparing, and I asked him where he was sitting. Once he said a row in main cabin, I told him, I'm sorry, these are for first class, but we have food for purchase in main cabin. He then told me his kid was hungry and demanded we give him free food. I kept saying, I'm sorry, but the food is for purchase. He didn't think it was fair that he had to pay for food because he had a hungry kid. The seat switch scam has happened to me more times than it should have. I'm a college student and thus naturally people, especially couples with babies, think it would be much easier to force me into switching. There was this one time I was on a really long flight from Chicago to India. I usually never haggle much about a seat and I'm pretty cool about switching if people ask me for it. I have this crappy quality of trying to avoid conflict in any way possible. This time I was fortunate enough to get one of those front seats with a lot of legroom. I knew this seemed too good to be true, and at any moment a couple with a baby would request for the seat, to which I will cave. Needless to say, minutes later, this couple came up to me, with the flight attendant, asking me to switch because they had a baby, and the father was sitting next to me. The mother had a middle seat way back in the plane for a very long flight. Although I was hesitant, but with 3 people awkwardly waiting on me to say yes, I eventually caved. As I was moving my stuff, one of my small empty plastic bottles fell from my bag and nearly hit the father. Now, you have to understand that this was one of those light plastic water bottles that could barely hurt if you tried to hit someone with it, let alone when it falls from the bag. But for some reason, that angered the father into believing that it could have somehow seriously injured their baby. Even after apologizing to him for a solid minute, he kept shouting at me about how careless I was and that I needed to learn plane etiquette. That just did it for me. I told him that I was no longer comfortable with the switch and just went back to my seat and pretended super hard to fall asleep. The entire flight, he did his best to try to annoy me, fighting me on the handrest, making it hard for me to move around, etc., but I never felt so good about my plane etiquette. Currently on an airplane and saw a man berate the flight attendant because they let employees of the airline board before the customers. He was so angry because he paid for business select. They didn't pay for crap, so why are they boarding before me? The The flight attendant responded with its company policy, many are actually working and just need to get to the airport they'll be leaving from. And there's also only 3 on the flight, so what's the big deal anyway? He continued to whine and complain to her for another 10 minutes or so. All because now there were only 140 seats to choose from instead of 143. Boo-hoo. Have you ever come across an online post by someone else that was about you? What was it? My cousin posted about how his family makes fun of him for playing video games and collecting Legos since he's in his mid-20s. He has a job and buys his own stuff. He went on to say that 2 family members, without fail, poorly sneak through his room every Thanksgiving so they can buy him a Lego set he doesn't already have for Christmas. Apparently, my husband and I are not as smooth as we thought. I read a post on Reddit relationships where this person had gone on a first date with a guy and she thought he was a very nice and pleasant guy, but was boring and there was no chemistry, and she wanted advice on how to reject him for the second date. The details she described about the first date were exactly similar to a first date I'd had a week before the post. 2 days after the post went up and people responded with advice, I got a text from the girl I went on a date with saying she thought I was a nice person and she had a good time, but she doesn't think we'll be a good match and wished me all the best. So yeah, I came to know about my rejection before she could actually reject me. In all fairness, this was my first date ever and I probably was extremely boring and nervous, and I don't blame her at all for rejecting me. Someone made up a story about me stealing their husband and posted it on this kind of site. They stole a picture from my Facebook profile and posted it. To this day, I have no idea who did that. That person must have known me but didn't actually know where I live since it was posted with a town that is 6 hours away from where I actually live. I immediately told my husband about it and thankfully he didn't believe it, but somehow someone found it at work and everyone was talking about it. Even the VP called me to ask me about it. It was embarrassing. The post still lives and there's nothing I can do for them to take it down, but at least I got one to remove my picture. This gif of a kid playing soccer who takes 2 goal shots to the face, back to back. That's me. I have no idea who filmed it or posted it to the internet. I made a post asking for advice about one of our roommates not having a job and worried about how to pay for rent. We ended up talking to him and he got a job. Everything was cool. At the end of the conversation, he says, "And stop posting about me on Reddit," in a playful way. I found a post about my friend's band, and then I wondered who posted it. And I found very quickly it was my ex-girlfriend who was now dating the guitar player of said band. And so I had a click through her history and found a post about how I'd accidentally kneed her in her privates while we were doing the deed, and it made a funny noise. It felt pretty weird reading that. If you'll excuse the narrator, he has to go and check the entire internet to see if any of his many romantic fumbles have been aired for all to see. Divorced my ex because of addiction and mistreatment, culminating in a serious felony attack. A few years later, he started dating. I checked her out online and stumbled into a post she made on legal advice websites asking questions about my will. She was asking about the custody arrangements I've made for my kids in the event that their father isn't sober or healthy at the time of my death. I lost my mind when I read that. I'll admit that my phone call with my ex about this did not reflect me at my best. I once met a guy at a bar. We exchanged numbers and were going on a date before I googled him and found out that he and his mum were being charged with attacking a woman who was feeding stray cats. I told my coworker the story and showed her the insane surveillance video. She shared the story on a thread where Aziz Ansari was asking if people ever do research before their dates, and he included my story in his book Modern Romance. So that was pretty cool. In case you're wondering, no, I didn't go on the date. Also, this guy and his mum tried to convince the woman that they beat unconscious that she fell. She didn't even know that she was beaten until she saw the surveillance video. Oh man, I would have just gone on the date and waited until he asked, "What hobbies do you have?" to say, "I like feeding stray cats," just to see his reaction. Seems like his reaction might be violent if you did this. Yeah, that seems like a great way to get beaten up by a guy and his mom if you ask me. Yep, my old roommate posted that I was stealing money from her and not paying my bills. Everyone on the thread was calling me a piece of crap and everything. What she forgot to put in the post was that she was a raging alcoholic. She never had money for the bills because she had spent it on booze. Everything was in my name because she still owed money on everything and they wouldn't turn things on in her name, even after she cleared her debt. She didn't talk about how she would be late for rent every month, but I was always on time. It got so bad that the landlord would call me to collect the rent. She is now in rehab and still trying to reconnect with me. I don't know if I can ever be her friend again after that. There's always more to the story, and I'm glad that I don't live with her anymore. When I was a freshman in university and Yik Yak was big. Classic. I had a knee brace on an injury that I wore every day. I'm also 5 foot tall and generally petite. Once I went to pick up a big package from the mail center and bring it back to my dorm. 1 block, so I knew I could do it and didn't ask for help. Someone wrote a Yik Yak to the tiny girl with a knee brace and a giant box, hang in there. It kinda made my day. My mum even has a screenshot of it saved. I'm pretty sure about this. There was a story I read about a girl walking home late on a foggy night, seeing someone she thought was pretty odd walking towards her. As I remember, described angrily, and she explained debating crossing the street but continued forward. When they crossed paths, she said hello, and after a significant pause when they were already a few steps apart and she heard a faint little hey, which she also found odd. That guy was me. I was actually just very drunk, a little high and cold, walking briskly towards my house, which was a few miles away from the party I was at that evening. I remember seeing a silhouette of someone coming through the fog and getting a little scared myself, followed by relief that it was a woman, then instantly filled with the realization that my drunk butt is probably frightening the crap out of her, which led to panic to get the situation over with as quickly as possible. I even remember thinking at the time of responding to the story, but somehow the concept of, hey, I think I'm the guy that weirded you out, how neat is that? Didn't seem worth the neat to even weirder ratio. I've been in that situation so often. I'm a tall and wide-shouldered guy, and you can't see my baby face in the dark. Yes, someone posted one of my prom pictures pretending to be me. I saw it on the front page, as did my ex-boyfriend who featured in it, and was teed off that I'd posted it. To be fair, the pic is hilarious and totally front-page worthy. They must have been someone who we knew in real life because they linked to my ex's music site, mentioned what I'm doing now, detailed our relationship, among a few other things. They ended up deleting their account once it got big enough that people posted it on my Facebook wall and stuff. There can be only one. I was dating an alcoholic, and when he fell off the wagon, I spent a lot of time reading alcoholic subs to try and better understand how to help him. I found some posts he made talking about me and how to explain his disease to me, since I grew up with alcoholics and it deeply affected me. People kept telling him we wouldn't make it or that I must have really low self-esteem, but he said I was smart and cute and had a once-in-a-lifetime soul and wasn't the kind of person you gave up. I found it well after the fact, but my heart basically exploded. Felt like dressing up one day for school, red lipstick and all. I checked Yik Yak later, and someone had called out my exact outfit down to the shoes and said, why? That's 2 posts about Yik Yak, and the narrator has no idea what the heck it is. Let me check Google real quick, and it's local Reddit? Huh, I thought the global reach for advice and commentary was kind of the point with Reddit. Feels like you'd be far more likely to get caught out on Yik Yak. I was judging for a writing competition and gave a poor score to one of the writers due to copious typos, grammar problems all over the place, and jarring narrative that seemed not to serve any purpose. She started stalking me and leaving nasty messages all over the forums, and then went over to Tumblr and here, talking crap about how horrible I am. I basically blocked her and reported her behavior to the mods, but they didn't do much, so I just ignored her, and she eventually disappeared. A few months later, she left a comment on one of my stories telling me that she'd gone off her bipolar meds and apologized for her behavior. I didn't reply, but it looks like she's in a better place and getting help now. I think it's brave of her to apologize for that. It's not easy to revisit things you wish you hadn't done if you don't have to. Good on her for recognizing her situation and apologizing. And good on you for keeping your distance and wishing her well. A few years ago, before I met my wife, I answered a Craigslist ad from someone who needed a friend. I'm being very vague on purpose because I know she's online a lot. The day we met, I knew I wanted to date her. We spent a lot of time together for a few weeks, and then she was suddenly busy most of the time. A few days later, she called me to apologize, saying she kinda freaked out because I was getting too close and she wasn't ready for a relationship right now. I was devastated but backed away to respect her request. A few months go by and I met my wife. Fast forward 2 years and my very pregnant wife and I are shopping and we see the girl. She's very uncomfortable seeing us and my wife gave her a big hug, saying that I've only said the best things about her. My wife was actually a little jealous of the one that got away, but I'm proud that she was so gracious about it. We only spent a few minutes chatting, then she said she had to go, and that was the last time I ever saw her. But a few weeks after that, I saw a Reddit post from a woman who claimed to have learned too late that she was in love. She mentioned a few specific things that made it super obvious it was her, and that it was about me. That day was really rough and I was super teed off at her for a long time. I felt like she was acting out an Adele song by posting such specific information online, hoping I'd see it and go back to her, despite being married and about to have a child. Not totally rational, I know, but it was just frustrating to me. The silver lining is that I have a son I would never trade anything for and a wife that loves me most of the time, which is normal, I think. Today, I hope she's happy, but I would never go back to her and I have zero regrets. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. An unknown poster posted a picture of me from a concert tailgate. Apparently, I have the highest belly button ever. It was posited that I was raised by bats. I thought the whole thread was hilarious but never figured out who posted the picture. It was grabbed from a buddy's Facebook. A couple of months ago, I got a screenshot from a friend saying someone was posting awful things about me on their blog. I was never mentioned by name, but it referenced a lot of identifiers that made it plain to see it was me. Went to the blog and there were several entries that were just about why and how much she hates me, can't figure out why anyone would want to be around me, and a recurring theme that I'm copying her. What makes it a bit weird is that we've only met her once at a party, but there was such vitriol in the posts. I have to admit it does bug me. I'd love to say it rolls off my back, but the part of me that struggled in making friends and trusting people just feels so insecure when I'm reminded of it like that. I ran across an ex posting about how we met, and when someone commented, "You should marry him," she responded, "I plan to." It sent my heart exploding to think someone could even jokingly say something like that about me. Well, it was a joke because she dumped me for her ex a week later. I made it to the cringeworthy Reddit once. It was a picture of me being stupid in a mall for the sake of a joke that was posted on social media and eventually found its way to Reddit. Me and my friends had a good laugh many years later when we found out. Back when Yik Yak was popular and I was in college, there was a post stating, 123 Fake Street, apartment 23, needs to take care of their dog. I hear it crying every night. We had no dog, never quite figured that one out. I always thought it was my roommate who made weird noises while playing video games. My freshman year of college, I saw a yak that was like, the girl in philosophy class wearing the specific article of clothing is gorgeous or something like that, clearly talking about me. I didn't tell anyone because I'm pretty average looking, and I didn't know if people would believe me, but it made my entire week. Not on Reddit, but I matched with a girl on Bumble and I was in the background of her first picture. I was wearing a Gary Payton jersey and still had a man bun. Rest in peace to the hair. Aha! So you were able to whimsically say that you had already had a long and storied history together on your first date. Magnificent. I found myself in a picture once. I came across a post that showed a bunch of people on a plane returned from Afghanistan, and he was giving the finger or something and sent it to his mum. His mum replied with her doing the same thing with a bunch of co-workers. I was in the first picture. It was kind of crazy seeing myself on the front page and was fun guessing who posted the picture. It wasn't the actual person who sent it to his mum, but a different co-worker. An ex of mine has made a Reddit account for the sole purpose of crapping on me and my posts on Reddit. Honestly, I'm just flabbergasted a person I loved, was intimate with, and dated on and off for almost 7 years is nothing more than a Reddit troll now. It would be really funny if it weren't so sad. It was a photograph on Icon Has Cheeseburger of a cat next to a piece of string in the shape of a heart with the caption, "Now will you feed me?" Not only was it quite certainly my parents' very distinctive cat, it was the flooring and the skirting board of my parents' living room. Quite frankly, it creeped the F out of all of us as we hadn't taken the photo, none of our friends had taken the photo, and we owned no pink string. We ended up deciding for our peace of mind that the painters who did my parents' house last year must have taken it and posted it on the internet. After my loser ex and I broke up, I saw him post to Reddit saying that their roommate had moved out and changed the Netflix password on them, asking for advice on getting it back. It was my Netflix account, paid for exclusively by me, and I cancelled it within 20 minutes after leaving because they couldn't be bothered to tear their eyes from the TV as I packed up my things in tears. I was in the very worst days of my anorexia and depression and had dropped below 75 pounds. I'm a 5'8" male, by the way, and was going to the gym to ride on a stationary bicycle every day for about 40 miles. I was often either very high or on several 5-hour energy shots every morning I was there. I came across a post on this sub from someone who worked at the gym asking for advice about whether she should do something about the skeletal guy that comes in every day because he looks like he's dying. Some comments were really quite disgusting. People saying that I was probably just image-obsessed and insisting that anorexics are narcissistic and vain. Truth be told, I was just kind of waiting to pass away at that point and completely checked out of life, living on 100 to 500 calories a day. And when I found the post, I got in the car and impulsively drove down I-5 on a full tank of gas with no destination, just bawling. Then ran out of gas and slept in my car at a truck stop. Alright, I'm going to keep it vague, but I found a post on Reddit relationships by my ex when we were dating. I found the post about 4 months after he wrote it, and I was moving away at the time of the post, and we did eventually end up breaking it off. And the post was basically him saying he didn't want to lose me, but he felt like it was happening. Felt pretty crappy after finding it, lots of regret. Do people even talk to each other anymore? Half this post is people telling internet strangers things they'd be far better off saying to the other person. I was once alerted by a friend that a picture of me was posted on the old facial book rather than Reddit. It was on some lame page of D-bag gearheads and a picture of me filling my tires up at a gas station immediately after I picked my car up from a body shop unrepaired after a recent accident. Random guy who snapped the pic was making fun of me for totaling my car, when in all reality I avoided what could have been a far worse situation as an SUV T-boned my Miata. Luckily, I swerved in time to avoid a direct hit to my door with the SUV hitting my tire instead. Overall, I called the D-bag out on his ignorance and told him to stop creeping on chicks at gas stations and stick to tickling his pickle to cars instead. Overall, I felt weird as crap and creeped out that some guy was taking pictures of me unknowingly at a gas station, then posting them to the interwebs. Can't imagine the lives of celebrities stalked by paparazzi. Gross. A co-worker of mine must have forgotten that I was on her Facebook and went on a rant about me. We were goofing off at work and I made a comment that if I moved away and somehow ended up at that job again, that something had gone terribly wrong in my life. Little did I know that that's pretty much what happened to her. I was incredibly embarrassed and apologized profusely, but that still didn't stop her from slamming me on Facebook while all of her friends joined in. At least I got to defend myself. This was also the same person that dragged me for being unable to breastfeed my kids. If you really loved them, you'd blah blah blah. What a C-word. Sort of. I saw a post asking for ideas on a fairly narrow research paper assignment, because she needed to turn her term paper topic to her professor the next day. My husband was teaching a class on that exact topic, with that assignment due the next day. So I suggested something I knew he'd be really interested in. He came home the next day all excited that one of his students had picked that topic. Holy crap, you are the patron saint of undergrads. I need to start contacting my professors' wives. Let it be known that people should not start contacting their educators' families at home, just in case anyone was already searching the web for their details. A few years ago, I was browsing Reddit Forever Alone, and there was a post that said something like, "I have a date on Monday, so I guess I'll be seeing you guys on Tuesday," along with a bunch of crass jokes about his date and how he was planning on knocking her up. Didn't take me long to realize that this was the same guy I had a date with on Monday, so I commented about how I'd see him in a few days, at which point he texted my number to verify it was actually me. We laughed it off and I still went on a date with him. He was pretty fun and it went fairly well, other than his constant awkward jokes about how I was so perfect for him and how badly he wanted to get me pregnant. We hadn't even kissed and I was maybe 18 and he was in his mid to late 20s, so it was extra uncomfortable and I didn't know how to respond. We talked a little a while after and never actually ended up making plans for another date, partially because logistics and partially because his endless comments about impregnating me were really starting to weird me out. A few months later I ran into him commenting about our date and how it didn't go anywhere, but I was too young and immature for him anyways. I had this terrible roommate. He made me so uncomfortable that I mostly hid in my room. He crossed my boundaries, invaded my privacy, and was passive-aggressive. I finally gave my notice and started packing. He posted a cheesy questionnaire on Facebook and one of the questions was, "What are you most looking forward to?" He put, "My horrible roommate moving out." A bunch of people I don't know, who must have assumed his roommate couldn't see, started offering vague supportive comments like, "Oh yeah, bad roommates are the worst," or "Hope they leave soon." It bothered me most because first of all the only thing I ever did to him was not want to date him and put in my notice. But also the fact that our mutual friends could see it and so could I, which is just rude. I decided to comment and said, "I'm sure your supportive friends who don't know the situation at all are unaware that you're being this rude where I and our mutual friends can see it. You aren't a perfect roommate either, but at least I treat you with enough respect to not badmouth you so openly. If you're going to be purposefully cruel and try to humiliate me, I'll have to unfriend you so I don't have to see it." Shortly after posting, he deleted the whole thread. I used to be really active in the Reddit for indie makeup and more, and there were brand owners and some rabid fans there. Makeup reviews end up getting taken very personally. I get so many people trying to spread crazy rumors about me, or maybe it was just the same crazy brand owner with 20 alts. People were saying I gave negative reviews for attention and would message new members negative reviews unsolicited just to destroy businesses. Who the heck has time for that? Your handmade lipstick grew mold. There's no grand conspiracy behind why your sales are failing. What is the best way someone has asked you out? A group of friends and I had gone to trivia at the campus bar, and after a few drinks and some great laughs, it was time to head home. There was a guy that I'd been hanging out with, but nothing too serious, so he walked me home, and as we got to his place, he stops and starts acting a bit odd. He finally says, "So, I've never really done this before, but, do you want to go out sometime?" Obviously, I was mostly excited and asked what he had in mind. His response was pure gold. "Oh, I don't know, I haven't thought that far ahead yet," and that was the end. I told him to tell me when and where, and that I would most definitely be there. We ended up going to a nice place in the downtown area and went for a long walk by the river. I can't really complain. I once got asked out on MySpace by some girl who said, "I'm friends with someone who used to babysit your younger brother." She had seen me in a metal club and asked her friend about me because he said he knew me. She stalked me for a while before sending that message. I found out later she was going to the club loads more often to see if I went. I was 16 and single, so I was totally up for it. Dated for a year or so, things were crazy as heck, and we broke up in a fit of rage, which resulted in her and her friend cornering me in her flat while they both screamed at me, and I grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it in her face, jumped out of the second-floor balcony of the building, and ran for the hills. I work at a little popcorn stand once a week. Every week, this cute, attractive, funny, witty man came in to buy popcorn and flirt with me. Every week, he left a lottery ticket in the tip jar with his phone number on it. One time, he got up the courage to say, "If you don't win this week, how about I take you out on a nice dinner to make up for it?" I thought it was very sweet, and we'd already had fun flirting and joking around. Too bad it turns out he was married. It's kind of sad that you have to inquire about these things before you accept a date. Just a note, he was not a midget or a clown or in his 80s. This is an interesting story, but that last tidbit of information's relevance is escaping me. Why is this an assumption that readers should be making? I'm obsessed now. Went to lunch with this guy at a local pub. We decided after lunch to walk around the neighborhood. I really had to pee, and we were outside this other restaurant I really like, so we went in. After a few drinks, he went to the bathroom and I paid for the drinks. He asked for the check when he got back, but the waiter just brought my receipt for him to sign. He said he's never had a girl buy his drinks, and what would his mother say to this? The restaurant gives a postcard with the tab, so I handed it over to him and told him to write her about it. He handed it back after writing, "Mum, this girl just bought my drinks. Not sure how to feel about this. Maybe I should take her to dinner this weekend." I thought it was cute, and I said yes. Well, a group of my friends decided to go out after work for some drinks, and he was going, so I asked him what time we were all meeting. He told me 5:30, so I arrived fashionably late at 5:45, only to find him at the table alone. I walked up and sat down, thinking everyone else was running late. We started chatting and quickly realized we have a lot of similarities, and I'm hooked. Around 7 p.m., everyone else starts arriving, and I'm curious as to why they were so late. They weren't. He told me an earlier time so he could spend some more time with me and get to know me. That night we kissed, and it has been sweet ever since. This story comes from a friend of my family. He was stuck in gridlock LA traffic on the Santa Monica freeway. Being close to losing his mind, he decided to roll down his window and start chatting with the woman in the car next to him. They hit it off, and he asked if she wanted to get off at the next exit and get some coffee. They've been married for about 8 years now. This thread is dangerous. It's actually giving me the courage to ask out a woman. I was at the student center in college on my laptop or something when this guy comes up to me and says, "You're the most gorgeous girl I've seen all day." I responded with something like, "Who put you up to this dare?" We talked for a bit and exchanged phone numbers, cause why not? He was really cocky and a year younger than me, but we hung out a lot cause he lived really close to me and I didn't have many friends. We became good friends, and I became good friends with his brothers and some other people he hung out with too. We didn't start dating until several years later when he was less annoying and less cocky. Now we're married and he's sitting really close to the TV playing Mass Effect shirtless. Score! My roommate was walking down the street the other day when a guy stared her straight in the eye and said, "Do you want to watch music television with me today?" She was taken aback but intrigued. That's a hard thing to say no to if done correctly. I was stuck in a really bad rush hour traffic on 95 when I heard a siren go off and a booming voice from a loudspeaker state, "Female in the gold Honda." I immediately started freaking out because I thought a cop was pulling me over with a loudspeaker and really had no idea what I could have possibly done. So I kind of feigned ignorance and hoped that it was all in my head. 10 seconds later I hear, "Beautiful female in the gold Honda." Wait, what? I turned around to see an ambulance about 2 cars back to the right of me, desperately trying to get my attention. The man driving the ambulance ended up asking me out over his loudspeaker. It was definitely the best way I've ever been asked out, because it was so gosh darn random and hilarious. Sorry to disappoint, but after he asked me out, I had to politely decline because I was seeing someone at the time. His response was along the lines of, "It's okay, I'm not jealous." And just for clarification, it was a gold-colored Honda, not a solid gold Honda. I lived in another state and he wanted to visit me. I said, no, that's too much pressure, and what if I didn't like him? He'd have wasted all that money. His exact words were, "But what if it did work out? It'd be a hell of a story. We're married now. That is a hell of a story." He walked into a club and screamed at the top of his lungs, "Who wants to do the deed with Matumbo?" We were talking on Facebook chat and playing Would You Rather, and he said, "Would you rather have the best cup of coffee or go to the zoo?" I said coffee, and he replied, "How about next Friday?" I'd just come out of a lecture with a bunch of friends and we were standing around talking, probably trying to figure out what we were going to do later that night. I noticed this guy standing outside my lecture hall looking at me. I'd seen him around but never really paid any attention to him. We make eye contact for a split second, I probably furrow my brow a bit, and he purses his lips a little in thought. A minute later he comes up to me, still standing in with a group of maybe 5 or 6 girls, and says, "Hi, I'm Steven." He's pretty average looking, wouldn't stand out in a crowd. I introduce myself back. "Hi, I'm Jen." Without missing a beat he says, "I've seen you around and promised myself that if you ever acknowledged me that I'd talk to you. I think you're cute and I'd love to hang out sometime." It was so straightforward and I was so impressed with his confidence, though he later told me he was about to crap himself. I said, "Sure, let's exchange numbers." After we exchanged numbers, he chats for a bit, probably to make sure I'm not a huge butthole, says he has to get going but will be in touch soon. We dated for about 9 months, then realized we were better as friends. I know the manner in which he asked me out wasn't special or particularly interesting, but it sticks out to me because it was uncomplicated and to the point. There were no games. Almost 6 or 7 years later, we still keep in touch and hang out every so often. Not something you can say about most exes. The first text I got, "Now I have your number. Do you like Chinese food and a corn maze? We're married now." Accepting that date could have gone one of 2 ways, and I'm very glad it went the non-kidnappy way. A guy quit his job for me. My dad was his boss and I worked there too. He was old-fashioned and told my dad that he was planning on asking me out. My dad freaked and told him that if he plans on dating me, he needs to put in his 2 weeks, and if he forgets about it, he can continue working like nothing happened. He put in his 2 weeks the next day and we've been together ever since that. That was 10 years ago. We only knew each other in passing and never said more than a few words here and there. My personal favorite was the man who followed me for a block and announced, "Can I root you?" Obviously, I was thrilled, and by thrilled I mean I walked very quickly to my car. How rude. It's, "Can I root you, please?" In high school, my fiancé was being pressured by our other friends to ask me to prom, so in a rush he scribbled, "Prom?" on an empty, greasy pizza box that he'd found in the recycling. My reaction? A high-pitched, sustained, "Sure." 6 years and 1 child later, our friends still make fun of my response. He and I were talking about books and movies and TV shows, and he asked me what kind of food I liked. I told him that I love Cajun food, and he asked if I'd been to a local hole-in-the-wall Cajun place. When I told him I hadn't, he said, "We need to go. This Wednesday. My treat? Sound alright?" He and I are engaged now. He sent me a text along the lines of, "I had a good time talking to you when we met the other night. Do you want to go out for a drink sometime?" Upfront and straightforward is honestly way better than some over-the-top romantic gesture, at least for a first date. When you've been dating for a while, sure, get fancy. But most girls would rather know that A, you're interested, and B, what you want than have their apartments filled with flowers and be serenaded on the accordion. It's amazing how many people overcomplicate this. All that's needed is to be straightforward and ask them out. There's no need to make an overly convoluted proposal. If they're interested, they'll say yes. If they're not, they'll say no. A first date is a chance to get to know each other to see if there's anything worth continuing for both the guy and the girl. And the best scene to do this is usually by having drinks or coffee. This gives either party a chance to leave relatively easily if it's not working out, unlike a dinner where you get stuck together until the check comes, or a movie where there's no social interaction. It's real life, not a Hollywood romantic comedy. I told a girl I won a hula hooping contest years ago, and she said, "No way!" And I said, "Yeah, you're right, but I hear most relationships are based on lies, so I figured I'd get us off to a good start." I was buzzed and wasn't sure if I'd seen it somewhere before or made it up. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Not that it's absolutely the best way any guy should ask a girl out, but it was endearing to me. We had been going on dates regularly for a couple of months. I don't think we'd ever actually talked on the phone, just texting and whatnot. One night I was out with some girlfriends and I got a text from him. "Hey, can you talk on the phone really quick?" "Yeah, sure. Everything okay?" He called and I could immediately sense how nervous he was on the phone. He started off asking how my night was going and just generally leading some silly small talk. He told me he was a little drunk, and after a minute or so, "So, was there something you needed?" "Oh yeah, I wanted to know if you'd be my girlfriend." So cute. So nervous. I shamefully didn't tell him yes immediately. It wasn't for lack of interest, I'm not a confident person, and wanted to make sure he was absolutely positive he wanted me like that. But I was so flattered that he felt like he had to get a little tipsy in order to officially ask me out. Anyway, here we are, almost 2 years later, living together in an apartment. I'm about to make my first skydive with him, and I love him more and more each day. If you see this, I love you very much, and I'm so happy you're mine. I once ordered a tall hot chocolate from a coffee shop. The guy behind the counter said, "Oh, so you want to order me?" Panties hit the floor. I'm imagining the Old Spice guy. Well, nobody ever orders a pale, pasty white guy. They should really pull that off the menu. I once asked a girl out through a Super Bowl bet, and I won. Thank you, Seahawks. By saying yes when I asked him out myself. Thank you. I have been keeping an eye out for stories where the girl asks the guy out, but this story's prompt was, "What's the best way a guy has asked you out?" So understandably things have been a little one-sided. My current boyfriend and I had the most awkward and casual courtship ever, and it became official with a conversation that went exactly like this. "So I've kind of been telling people you're my girlfriend." "Okay. Does that make you my girlfriend?" "I guess so." Similar to what a lot of people are saying regarding honesty and being straightforward, my current boyfriend asked me out by saying verbatim, "Well, I told a girl at work you were my girlfriend, so what do you say? Be my girlfriend. Do it." It's important to note that by this point we'd been seeing each other for a bit and had developed an understanding of the other's humor, so it was actually the perfect approach. I work at Starbucks and he came through the drive-thru. He got a dirty chai and paid with cash, but he asked if he could have his receipt. I thought it was a little weird that he'd wanted a receipt because he paid in cash. But before I could hand it to him, he said, "And in case I have any questions, would you write your number down?" I was shocked and flattered, so I did. That was almost 3 years ago, and we've been inseparable ever since. On a scale of 1 to America, how free are you tonight? That got me. I'm Guantanamo. When I was a server, I had a handsome gentleman ask me a couple of questions about the specials, and then he replied to say, "So I can have anything I want on this menu?" "Of course you can," I replied. He dropped the menu flat to the floor and said, "Would you stand on this for me?" I was flattered, it was witty and made me blush, but I'm gay, so he ended up having the beef dip. We had just done the deed, he was wasted, he flopped on top of me and said, "Date me." He then passed out and didn't remember the next day. We're now happily married and I hope he reads this. So, doing the deed comes before the date. Gotcha. I'm glad I'm taking my notes. I've had pretty good results with, "Want to meet for coffee?" It's low pressure and low risk. If you're weird, it's a public place and they can just leave any time since you've met them there. You can make it 20 minutes or if it goes well, make plans to meet that night. The other perk is you can see if she shares your coffee addiction. If you don't drink coffee, you can get the F out of my face. I once did an imaginary fishing pole cast towards a girl in a group at a bar. It somehow worked and she did a few flops to get over to me. Her reaction was perfect and I've never tried that trick again. My favourite one was pure chance and confidence. On my way back home from London, I travelled through Leicester Square tube station. I play a game called Keep Up Commuter. I race against commuters determined to get through the crowds. I'm jogging with this cute banker guy next to me, then suddenly this old Italian guy clocks me. Bollocks. He started offering me his pizza, which he insists is genuine and real Italian. In his defense, he was holding an actual pizza, but I refused and insisted I was full already. Cute banker guy had noticed all of this and glared as I refused. So when we go to part ways to go north as the Italian goes south, cute banker guy gets up the courage to ask, "Can I get some pizza if she doesn't?" He stares him down and shouts, "You are no a pretty lady." The classic awkward hilarity this erupted in me was unreal, laughing at this banker as he stands there flustered. We got to talking and have known each other for about 9 months now. It was all down to pure luck and I enjoyed the fun of it all. Guys, go for it. I don't know if this really counts, but whatever. When I was in the 10th grade, a classmate of mine was hit by a car and his arm was severed above the elbow. They were able to reattach it, but he lost a lot of mobility. Fast forward to senior year, I'm house sitting for my uncle and this kid lives across the street. He comes over, we smoke and chat a while, and then all of a sudden he uses his functioning arm to lift up his other, mostly dead arm and place it gently around my shoulder. I was speechless. I think we made out or something, but I can't remember anymore. He came up to me, stuck his hand out and said, "Hi, my name is… name. What's your name?" I said my name, he misunderstood and we joked about that. I'd say it worked pretty well because 10 years later we're married and I'm currently serving as an incubator for another one of his offspring. Wonderful that such a cute and bumbling pickup could lead to this distinctly clinical-sounding relationship. I hope you and your donor live a long, fulfilling life. I was driving around town after work, windows down. It was a gorgeous October day. I noticed 2 guys in a car next to me, one in civilian clothes, the other with his ABU's, Air Force uniform. I thought it was adorable that they were together because Don't Ask, Don't Tell had just been repealed. I kept driving. A friend prank called me and asked if I had any rubbers, so I was laughing. We hung up and I was singing along to a Christina Aguilera song, I Hate Boys. I stopped at an intersection and glanced in my rearview and saw a guy running full tilt toward my car. I was so shocked that I didn't think to lock my doors or anything. He got to my car, threw a slip of paper in and ran off. It happened so fast I didn't even really see him. The slip of paper was a receipt from some dinosaur park in Texas, and on the back was scribbled a phone number, all bumpy from being written on a car dashboard in a rush. I'm pretty sure I sat in my car with my mouth agape for like 5 minutes. I nearly missed the light when it turned green. I watched as the guy drove past me. It was the man in civilian clothes that I thought was gay. I went home and tried to work up the courage to call him, but I chickened out and texted him instead. I said, "Is this the crazy effer that threw his phone number into my car?" And he replied, "Is this the crazy girl who's texting me back?" We were inseparable after that. We've been married for 2 years now. I'd stayed over at his house. We were best friends, and in the morning he said, "Let's go to Liverpool." We ran to the train station, got on the first train there, went to the Tate and laughed at all the crap art. I swear it was like some cliché indie film. Then we went to a top restaurant, laughed at all his cheesy jokes, then we had coffee on the way back on the train. When we got back to his, he told me he wanted me to be his girlfriend. We'd already been cuddling and holding hands all day and it was lovely. We went to bed and cuddled all night, revealing our mutual feelings. Totally natural progression from friends to partners. Hope that gives you some ideas. The landlord in Spider-Man 3 method is the most direct. Just tell her, "I am man, you are woman." I have a very, very warped sense of humor. I had a guy come up to me, lean in really close, take a deep breath, and then he says, "Oh my god, you smell so good. Kind of like a whore." I didn't see that line coming. I ended up being with him for 2 years. He said, "Climb in the car." So I did. He then drove with me for an hour until we reached a very small, spooky village. Then he parked the car in the middle of what seemed to be a wood. It was then that I started to freak out a bit. I mean, I'm courageous, but this made me question if I was being murdered. He climbed out of his car and I followed with some hesitation. Then we were in front of a huge fence. It was slightly bent on top, so he managed to get over the fence rather easily. I got stuck on my jeans and tore them open for a bit, landing with a thump on the grass. Holding out a tiny flashlight, he led me up a steep mountain covered with rocks. All the while, I'm like, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap, oh crap. Then I looked up and the moonlight revealed an old castle ruin. Both my eyebrows raise. There, on top of the tower, we stand and talk, enjoying the stars and the noises of the animals in the woods. It's not too cold, and how cool's that to raid a castle in the middle of the night? I was thrilled. In middle school, a boy asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said no, so he asked if I wanted one, and thus, true love was born. In first grade, a boy came up to me and said, "Do you like me? Your friend said you liked me." And I yelled, "No," and ran away. I did like him. What might have been? By asking me out on a date, not to hang out, chill, grab drinks, etc. Actually, hey, I'd love to take you out to dinner and get to know you. Sitting across from you at dinner, discussing food on the menu, having constant conversation, not interrupted by TV or a movie. I'm worth it and you are too. As a follow-up to that, asking me out again at the end of the night will generally garner a yes. The whole 3-day thing is complete and utter bullcrap. You know what's sexy? A guy who likes me and isn't afraid to let me know he does. I never ever said yes to a guy who would wait several days to contact me again after a date. If he was genuinely interested, he would let me know. Scientists, what do you know that would blow a regular person's mind? Geneticist here. Different people have different forms of various enzymes, meaning that medication is horribly, awfully imprecise and affects people differently. For example, some people break down codeine into morphine very quickly, which can result in a far too potent dose, and some people hardly break it down at all, so there's no pain-killing effect. Until very recently, there was no way to know but try it. The lab I worked in developed a way to record the vibrations a caterpillar produces when feeding on a leaf. We found that plants are able to respond to this vibration when it's played back to them. It not only primes their defenses, but they can distinguish this vibration from vibrations caused by wind blowing, insects walking on them, insect mating calls, etc., and they will not prime their defenses to those vibrations. In short, plants don't have ears, but they can still hear? Okay, and what's the point of responding? The caterpillar's eating it, and the plant goes, "Man, that hurts," and the caterpillar keeps eating? It's more like the plant releases toxins for its friend caterpillar to munch on. Exactly, then releases pheromones to the surrounding plants of the same species to do the same, and sends further messages through the underground fungal hi-fi networks. Plants are sophisticated things and are far more complex and active than we commonly realize. Giraffes have to eat from trees that are upwind from other trees they eat from because they release pheromones to warn the other trees. Anything downwind goes into defense mode and releases chemicals that make the giraffe not want to eat from that tree. Funny that animals have to hunt their plants and find unsuspecting trees to eat from. My research involves Parkinson's disease, and recently there's been findings that contracting an infection such as the flu whilst having PD will make the disease progress much faster, as your immune system will kill the brain cells responsible, in a kind of accidental collateral damage response. So we're looking at how some anti-inflammatories could slow the progress of PD by stopping infections from taking their toll. Early days, but very promising. Just started a PhD in astrobiology. Does that make me a scientist? Looking at microbe behavior in low-gravity environments, it turns out that microgravity has a tendency to make them into these superbugs that are incredibly resistant to antibiotics. There's some worry that this will be a pretty big problem as human space exploration develops. Ah, lovely. Yet another reason for me to never go out into the dark, horrifying expanse of space. Honestly, I was already there, you didn't have to keep trying so hard, universe. Here's a bit of psychology, since the harder sciences are well represented in this story group, specifically relationship psychology. It's been demonstrated that there's a particular ratio of positive to negative interactions that help predict the outcome of relationships. Marriages with less than this ratio are far more likely to lead to a divorce. The ratio is roughly 5-to-1. For example, if there are less than 5 compliments you give your significant other for every 1 criticism, then they're more likely to believe that you criticize them more than compliment them. If you have less than 5 good days a week with your significant other for every 1 bad day, then when you think back over your months or years together, you're more likely to think that you have an equal amount of bad days than good, even more bad days than good. The mind-blowing part is really thinking about that ratio and what it means about our memory and perspectives. Ideally, we'd like to think that if we get complimented about as often as we're criticized, we'd remember a balanced mix of both. But the evidence supports the idea that we really take negative words or events to heart, and that it takes a highly disproportionate amount of positive praise or interactions to balance them out. Something to keep in mind when considering both how you feel and how you treat others. Gotcha. So, you're beautiful, you make me happy, your dinners are lovely, I love what you've done with the house, I appreciate you running me a bath, babe, I think you need to lose a few pounds. Upon reflection, I wouldn't dare. I value my life. Dialects continuums in linguistics. Among certain languages, such as the Slavic languages and Western Romance languages, like Portuguese, Galician, Spanish, Catalan, etc., there's no fine line from where one language ends and another begins. However, due to standardization, this is no longer largely the case. Instead, you'd have one language gradually changing into another as you go farther and farther away. Think of it like in Britain, where the further north you go, the more Scottish the dialect becomes, until eventually you have full-on Scots. Sort of along the same lines, I was fascinated to learn that there are regional dialects in British Sign Language. For example, there are 3 separate signs for the holiday, depending on where you are in the country. Everyone always associates dopamine with enjoyable experiences or happiness, but in a certain part of the brain, how much dopamine is released can be calculated as the amount of reward received compared to the amount of reward expected. This is literally a quantitative signal. If you expected there to be 10 sweets in the bag but there were actually 12, then you'd get an increase in dopamine release, but not as much as if there were 14 sweets in the bag. Similarly, if you expected 10 and received only 8, you'd actually get a dip in the dopamine signal, but not as much as if you'd only received 6, and so on and so forth. This is one of those rare examples where a quantitative theory or model, reinforcement learning, can be mapped straight onto a neuroscientific phenomenon.
Is this why people get hooked on pessimism?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't expect anything, you're never disappointed, and thusly don't take dips in your dopamine levels. That's really interesting to me. I come from a behavioral economics background, and that's how they modified expected utility theory with prospect theory. Essentially, we just say that people get utility from changes rather than absolute numbers. For example, someone who received a $2,000 raise last year will be unhappy with a $1,000 raise this year, because even though it's good to have more money, it's a negative change from their expectations. I work with CRISPR-Cas9 system. It essentially allows us to edit the genome, adding or removing nucleotides or whole genes or altering nucleotides. While there were previous methods for editing genome, this one's quite simple. It requires a few plasmids, less than $100, a basic research lab, and someone who can do fairly basic molecular biology research. Researchers in China are using it on humans now for cancer therapy. It also has the possibility for transmitted disease treatment. Additionally, the part I find most fascinating and most scary are gene drives. We're able to use it to kill off all mosquitoes and thus eliminating Zika and malaria in a matter of a few mosquito generations. This would also be theoretically possible for other species that haven't been researched. I have a good one and a bad one. The bad? More than 2 out of every 3 people in the world carry a virus that causes oral or downstairs herpes. The good is that if you genetically remove one of HSV's key genes, GD, you get a vaccine strain that's protected mice against 10 times the lethal dose of the deadliest herpes strains ever discovered. In short, everyone might have herpes, but it won't always be forever. Wow. I knew that a lot of people had those pesky sores, but I didn't know it was that many. Yikes. Here's hoping we all get immunized like our author here predicts. Jevons paradox. The more energy efficient we make technology, the more energy we actually use. That actually makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. For example, I recently got a new phone that has much better battery life. 3 times the screen use time with only a 30% bigger battery. But despite the energy use being so much more efficient, I use the phone a lot more because I don't have to worry about the battery dying, making my overall energy use much higher than before despite being much more power efficient. Nuclear transmutation. It's 100% possible to turn lead into gold by yanking 3 protons out of a lead nucleus. It was first done in the 1920s. Of course, it's prohibitively expensive and ultimately a waste of money and energy, but it can be done. The alchemists were right. I'm an earthquake geophysicist. I study something most people have never heard of: slow earthquakes. In a regular earthquake, a fault, as in the crack between big pieces of rock, moves or slips very quickly. Typically, an earthquake takes a few seconds to occur. This rapid movement excites seismic waves, which are similar to sound waves that travel through the earth and cause shaking. In slow earthquakes, everything is the same except that high temperatures and/or fluid pressures cause the speed of fault slip to max out at a fairly low value. So we might get movement equivalent to what we would see in a magnitude 7 earthquake, but instead of occurring over seconds, it occurs over weeks, months, or even years. The slowness means no seismic waves and no damage. In fact, the traditional instrument used to study earthquakes, the seismometer, won't see these. So we use scientific-grade GPS instead and literally watch the rocks move. Unfortunately, slow earthquakes, while they relieve the forces where they occur, actually increase the probability of regular earthquakes on other faults or other parts of the same fault. There are actually documented cases of slow earthquakes triggering regular ones. The Great Tohoku, Japan earthquake of 2011 actually started off 2 weeks earlier with a slow earthquake. I'm working on trying to find ways to use slow earthquakes to forecast regular ones. Feto-maternal transfer. I learned about it in a neuroscience class. Especially when a woman is pregnant, stem cells can travel from the fetus to the mother and actually survive for long periods of time in the hippocampus, an area of the brain used for memory formation. I'm pretty sure the stem cells can survive in other parts of the body, but it's really cool to think that some of your DNA is in the part of your mother's brain where new memories are formed. In short, stem cells from a fetus can get transferred to the mother's hippocampus, the part of the brain responsible for forming new memories. I remember a Radiolab episode about this. They told the story of a woman who had stem cells from a failed twin who she shared her mother's womb with. Some of those cells became ovaries. Later, when she had a baby, they found that while he was his father's son, she was not genetically his mother. Many animals use the location of the sun in the sky for navigational purposes. Many, but fewer animals use the way sunlight is polarized as a proxy for the location of the sun in the sky. This allows for a mental compass and is how many animals keep moving in their required direction. And many, although fewer again, animals use the moon for the same purpose. However, only one known species, the dung beetle, uses the way the moon's light is polarized to keep rolling their dung in straight lines. However, when the moon is absent from the sky, the beetles default to using the location of the Milky Way in the sky for navigation. 15 days of the month of October from the equator, we have both the moon and the Milky Way out of vision of the beetles. For these 15 days, they roll in almost random directions, during which they turn frequently and just generally look kinda drunk. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Tropospheric ducting. Shortwave radio signals up to about 30 MHz, which bounce off a layer of charged particles in the atmosphere and are reflected back down to Earth, which is why you hear so many AM stations at night. Normally, higher frequencies just poke straight through and go out into outer space. But under certain conditions, they pass through a gap in one layer, hit another and bounce along between the two, like when you get the ball trapped behind the bricks in Arkanoid, until eventually it bounces back out hundreds of miles away with almost no loss. So by sheer accident of meteorology, you can sometimes bounce VHF and UHF signals far further than they normally go, and they sound like they're just from down the road. So you've heard of stem cells, right? Long story short, cells that can transform into other kinds of cells whilst also dividing and reproducing forever. They're responsible for making new blood cells, driving wound healing, among other things. Really neat stuff. It's now fairly accepted in my field that deadly viruses also have stem cells. We think that these cancer stem cells aren't as susceptible to chemotherapy and are partly responsible for why the virus seems to come back even after very aggressive chemo. But as to their exact identity, strategies to destroy them, and where they come from, we're working on that. There have been a few posts specifically on STEM research, but this is the first one I've seen detailing some of the problems they can cause to the human system as opposed to the cures. Obviously, we should continue to study their medical applications, but it's novel to hear about the problems certain kinds cause that we have to learn to combat simultaneously. Meteorologist here. Upper atmospheric lighting is one of the most seldom understood aspects of meteorology. Above some thunderstorms, sometimes you can spot a jet of blue shooting up from the thunderstorms about 50 kilometers. Even more impressive are sprites, giant red emissions anywhere from 50 kilometers to 100 kilometers above the surface. And ELVs, which is an acronym for emissions of light and very low-frequency perturbations due to electromagnetic pulse sources, which are even crazier. They exist for only a millisecond but can expand to a radius of 400 kilometers from a storm as a very faint red light. Crazy stuff. It's not exactly mind-blowing, but it's a neat and recent finding that might interest anyone who keeps up with the vaccine topic. Post-mortem brain examinations of kids on the spectrum has shown improper cortical distribution. A little background: the layers of your cortex are established very specifically before birth. If you have a healthy brain, you will exit your mother with a clearly defined cortical distribution, and that layer differentiation does not continue post-birth. Thus, we can conclude that the disrupted cortex structures being found in autistic children cannot be attributed to vaccines, which are administered after birth. Furthermore, we can also conclude that autism begins affecting children in the womb. For reference, cortical and cortex are synonymous. C-section babies are, on average, less healthy and have more compromised immune systems. This is likely because the birth canal is smearing the last bit of mum's immune system programming before breast milk, as well as helping create a healthy bacterial environment for the newborn. Essentially, a mother's walls on the birth canal are coated in things that will help the baby adjust to life outside the womb. C-section babies are starting to get the benefits of this, with the doctors wiping the wall fluids onto the baby's face, mouth, and head. Flashover and backdrafts are pretty cool and terrifying. Basically, flashover is when you get to a point in a compartment with a set amount of ventilation where the heat release of the fire reaches a certain kilowatt and every combustible in the room ignites almost simultaneously. It's really freaking hot and it's really, really bad to be caught in. Backdraft is when there's a lack of oxygen in a compartment with no ventilation. The hot gases build and build and build, and then when oxygen is reintroduced to the building, it explodes in what is basically a fireball. Violently. Scientifically fascinating and also horrible to be a firefighter in. Surface science. Van der Waals forces between material are almost universally attractive, but it's possible to create a three-material stack of a surface, an intermediate, which is a liquid or potentially a thin film, and a contacting material that has a repulsive interaction, meaning that the surface and contacting material will repel each other like two north ends of a magnet. Applications would include surfaces that would be water, oil, dirt, a biohazard, or whatever proof, and frictionless interfaces, tested by AFM and undetectable at the pico-Newton level. Unfortunately, the thin films required are not easy or cheap to make, and development would be really, really expensive. Not quite mind-blowing, but definitely exciting. We now have microscopes that can achieve resolution in the low nm range in living cells. We can now start to research the dynamics of small subcellular organelles that are important for a wide range of things, such as embryonic development, cancer progression, and cell signaling. I'm a dentistry student, and yesterday a paper was published where a group of scientists managed to use an anti-Alzheimer's drug in order to build new dentin in damaged teeth. Pulp tissues are already capable of doing that, but new research is desperately trying to find agents that can speed up the process. So this is great news. Giving a person superpowers in VR, for example the power of flight, will prime concepts of superpowers and the heroes we associate it with it, and will increase helpful behavior. Long story short, there was a study wherein people had to fly with a helicopter or use hand gestures, like Superman, to fly in VR. After the experiment, the conductor accidentally spilled a pen case. The people flying like Superman were significantly more prone to jumping in and helping the conductor to pick up the pens. I really like the idea that the people tend to have the desire to use their powers for good rather than to go full-on supervillain. There's a documentary that's been released lately and it's called Most Likely to Succeed. It's about a new education method where it's 90% project-based. The teachers don't do much other than just let the students do their projects and give guidance, as well as organize what projects to do. It's a unique way of teaching that only works in specific schools. Some teachers and members of society think it's the greatest idea and every school should be using it. Me and other teachers don't see it as straightforward as it seems to be. I would recommend giving it a watch though. I live and study in Denmark, and to my knowledge, at least universities here, I don't know about high school, have an 80% project-based teaching. I moved here from a country that's 100% focused just on theoretical approach, and you just need to read and remember what you read. I can say in my case that project-based learning is way more efficient. That surprises the narrator not at all. Give me a concrete goal and clear steps to achieve it, and I will shine and complete stuff before the deadline. Give me a big, vacuous subject to find out information about and read about in my spare time, and my motivation will be very poor indeed. Right now, as we speak, you're being crossed by millions of particles per second and per centimeter square of your body. These very same particles will be able to fly across the Earth as easily as if they flew through a vacuum. In fact, to reliably stop them, you'd have to build a 3 light-years thick lead wall, i.e. a wall that would be 2/3 of the distance between the Sun and Alpha Centauri, the nearest star. Said particles are electrically neutral. They don't interact through nuclear force and are 100,000 times lighter than an electron, or perhaps even lighter. Yet we can detect them every day. Neutrinos are cool. Pretty much everything about sleep is terrifying, most of all that we don't really know what it is or why we do it or how it works. Why do you sleep? Because you get tired. How do you sleep? Well, here's a list of things that change while you sleep. What is sleep? When you aren't awake. What I find most disturbing is sleepwalking and parasomnias. Watching people sit up during a sleep study and finding out that they're still asleep. Opening their eyes and looking around, and then usually they pick at the wires, maybe lifting them up and tugging on them, or touching where they're placed on their head. And that's not even the really creepy part. That is that they don't pull them off or anything. Instead, I've so far only seen them all do the same thing. They give up. Like, you can read the facial expressions saying, "Screw it, this is too complicated for me to deal with," and they just lie back down and don't go back to sleep because they didn't wake up. They just close their eyes. It's not that the lights are on but nobody's home, it's the lights are on but you aren't in there. I mean, I'm not really a scientist, I'm just a lab tech, so maybe there's an explanation that makes it less disturbing. I'm not a scientist, but I've studied sleep and have on occasion sleepwalked. Your lower brain, active during sleepwalking, is quite capable of performing basic tasks without your conscious input, such as standing up, walking around, peeing, and so on. However, your cognitive maps are stored in your upper brain, which is needed for the complicated stuff. Sleepwalkers are generally trying to realize an external goal, such as needing the bathroom, eating due to hunger. However, without the upper brain, it makes a best guess, which is why it's common to hear about sleepwalkers getting up in the middle of the night and urinating on chairs or anything that might remotely resemble a toilet to something that doesn't know what a toilet is. In your example, I suspect the lower brain is trying to remove the wires, as I assume that the body might have a problem with things sticking onto it, such as, for example, leeches. But it lacks the cognitive ability to comprehend what's going on, but is somehow satisfied that there's no threat, so it doesn't boot the upper brain and goes back to sleep. Trees suck up water. Most people know that, but what blows my mind is that they don't have to be alive to do it. Dead, standing trees still suck up water. It's a structural component, not an active function of the living organism. Also, there's way more water from snowmelt than we ever thought there was stored in trees, based on a recent isotopic study of Alaska forests. Malaria parasites have shown resistance to every single anti-malarial drug in existence and can develop resistance before new drugs are even finished in trials. Not that there's a big push for anti-malarial drug development. Last I checked, there were 7 new drugs for male member dysfunction in the pipeline for every anti-malarial, and 64 drugs for heart disease. A problem a lot of people in malaria-endemic countries would be thrilled to live long enough to have. That about 1% of the noise you see on a TV when it's not tuned, the black and white dots with the horrible noise everyone hates, is the interference from the cosmic background radiation, the leftovers of the Big Bang. Some people know, but it blew my mind as a kid, and now I'm a physicist and it still does. Galaxy lensing. I think it's just beautiful. Just like the way a magnifying glass works to make things appear bigger, large chunks of mass in our universe, like galaxies, have a strong gravitational pull over large amounts of space that focuses light, giving a distorted look, which leads to some special cases. It often results in an Einstein ring, but not in all cases. This phenomenon has been used to probe universes and can give good insight into finding better measurements on the Hubble constant, without local contamination like many other methods. The Casimir effect. Simply put, if 2 unchanged plates are brought very close together, due to the presence of virtual particles, the plates are forced together. Only smaller wave functions can fit between the plates, meaning less virtual pairs are created there, creating a pressure difference between the inside and outside, forcing the plates together. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.